Chapter 1563. The True Sword Sect had the Wind Trust Hall, which specialized in collecting and analyzing information. Therefore, it didn't take long for Chumu to find out how many people had entered the ancient sacred city and how many people had left alive after the ancient sacred city had left. Myriad ancient sacred city is full of opportunities, but also full of danger. After learning of this, Chumu couldn't help but sigh. The number of people who had entered the ancient sacred city, including the Nirvana realm and Eternal realm experts, was more than 10 million. However, after the ancient sacred city had left, only less than 5 million people had survived. In other words, more than 5 million people had died in the ancient sacred city. They weren't ordinary people. They were at least high-level Nirvana realm experts, and most of them were Eternal realm saint experts. Even though most of them were low-level saint experts, it was still shocking. In the entire Deep Blue world, there were hundreds of millions of people from various races. However, only a small portion of them could cultivate to the Eternal realm, and it would take at least a few hundred years. Hundreds of years of hard work, all for nothing. After finding out, Chumu and the others couldn't help but feel a chill down their spines. If so many people had died every time the ancient sacred city descended, it was no wonder that there was an endless amount of evil aura in the ancient sacred city. However, this was something that could not be helped. Walking on the path of cultivation was not about stability. Unless one retired, got married, had children, and was willing to be ordinary. Otherwise, if one wanted to go further on the path of cultivation, obtain greater strength and a higher status, one had to constantly work hard. For cultivators, hard work was necessary, but it didn't mean that one could reap rewards just because they worked hard. Cultivation was about resources. No matter how talented a person was, no matter how hard they worked, without enough resources, the height they could reach in the end was limited. For example, in the ancient Sword Continent, no matter how talented a person was, it was difficult to advance to the Eternal realm and become a true saint expert. This was the limit of the cultivation environment. Cultivation environment, opportunities, treasures, and so on were all indispensable on the path of cultivation. In order to obtain a better cultivation environment, opportunities, and treasures, one had to pay a price. This price was often accompanied by a life and death crisis. This had been the case since ancient times. Gulwankong and the other two stayed in the Real Sword Sect for the time being. Although the cultivation environment in the Real Sword Sect was not as good as in the ancient sacred city, it was still okay. However, once one reached the Eternal realm, it would not be so easy to raise one's cultivation level. Gulwankong and the other two had also become guest elders of the True Sword Sect. Therefore, they could read the books and sword arts of the True Sword Sect as they wished. The sword skills brought out from the forest of 10,000 sword steels of the True God Sword Sect were extremely profound. Gulwankong and the other two were completely immersed in it, comprehending swordsmanship, practicing cultivation techniques, and tempering the saint body. In the few days after Chumu returned to the True Sword Sect, he understood the big and small matters of the True Sword Sect and began to make big moves. This time, Chumu planned to fix the profound Sun Realm within the True Sword Sect. This was a big event, but Chumu did not intend to publicize it. If the profound Sun Realm settled in the True Sword Sect, it would greatly increase the foundation of the True Sword Sect. If the outside world knew about this, it might attract unwanted attention and bring about some trouble. Moreover, if the profound Sun Realm settled in the True Sword Sect, even if it was not publicized, it could become the last gate of the True Sword Sect. Therefore, Chumu gathered all the martial saints of the True Sword Sect at the main peak of the Tao Sect and entered the deepest part of the Sect Master's Hall. Every martial saint was very confused. They did not understand why Chumu gathered all of them in the deepest part of the Sect Master's Hall. During this trip to the ancient sacred city, I obtained a small world. I planned to settle this small world in the True Sword Sect and make it the True Sword Sect's small world. Chumu said directly, "Small world." The martial saint's eyes immediately widened. Some of their eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. They were very clear that ordinary sects did not have small worlds. Only those powerful sects had the qualifications and ability to possess small worlds. In the entire Azure Wave Empire, including the Azure Wave Imperial family, there were no more than 10 forces that possessed small worlds. One must know that there were more than 10,000 sects and forces in the Azure Wave Empire. Out of more than 10,000 forces, only less than 10 of them had small worlds. From this, one could imagine how precious a small world was, and those forces that possessed small worlds were very powerful. In the entire Deep Blue world, they were at least first-rate forces. If people knew that the True Sword sect, which could only be considered a second-rate force, was going to possess a small world, they would definitely be targeted. At that time, it would be a disaster. Perhaps even the Azure Wave Imperial family would be tempted to make a move and seize it by force. Chu Mu naturally understood this point. Therefore, the martial saints that he had gathered were all people that truly belonged to the True Sword sect. The 7 elders were originally the supreme elders of the True Sword sect. They wholeheartedly sought development for the True Sword sect and were incomparably loyal to the True Sword sect. The other 3 were Sword Saint Mei Lin Wenfei, Long Yi, and the others. These 3 were contracted by Chu Mu and followed Chu Mu as their master. Chu Mu also trusted Gu Luankong and the other 2. However, they were currently in seclusion to comprehend the sword techniques. Therefore, they did not come. The martial saints all took action. They tried their best to seal off the surroundings to ensure that their auras would not leak out. Chu Mu took out the Mystic Yang Realm bead. Everyone's gaze was immediately attracted to it. It was like a magnet attracting iron shavings. They could not shift their gazes away. The Mystic Yang Realm bead had already been completely refined by Chu Mu. He was the master. Therefore, Chu Mu could freely control it. With a thought, the Mystic Yang Realm bead left Chu Mu's palm and flew up. It emitted a bright red light. A warm aura spread out, making people feel extremely comfortable. What kind of power is this? Such pure power. All the saint-level experts were astonished. This is Yang Qi. One step further, and it will be pure Yang Qi. Chu Mu said. When the elders heard this, they immediately became excited. Sect Master, is there a lot of pure Yang Qi in this small world? The 4th elder's eyes lit up as he asked. It's all right. Chu Mu replied with a smile that did not look like a smile. The elders were depressed. What did he mean by it's all right? More or less. This world is called the Mystic Yang Realm. The heaven and earth Yuan Qi is thin, but the Yang Qi is pure and rich. The Mystic Yang Palace is filled with pure Yang Qi. Chu Mu did not tease the elders. He explained, the Mystic Yang Realm automatically absorbs the heaven and earth Yuan Qi from the outside world and transforms it into Yang Qi. After being absorbed by the Mystic Yang Palace, it transforms into pure Yang Qi. If you cultivate in the Mystic Yang Palace for a long period of time, the elders may be able to condense a pure Yang body and cultivate a pure Yang saint body. Chu Mu added, suddenly, every martial saint's breathing quickened. The strongest among them was a 6-star martial saint. Moreover, he was a sword saint. Unfortunately, their saint bodies were all ordinary saint bodies. There was nothing special about them. If they could condense a pure Yang saint body, their saint bodies would be even stronger. Under the condition of activating their saint bodies, their strength would increase by a lot. While Chu Mu was speaking, the bright red light emitted by the Mystic Yang Realm bead became very bright and dazzling. Immediately after, the Mystic Yang Realm bead slowly descended. It was as if it was tearing the space apart. The powerful energy shook endlessly. The elders immediately released their own energy to seal it, preventing the Mystic Yang Realm bead's energy from leaking out. Chu Mu wholeheartedly controlled it, trying his best to restrain the Mystic Yang Realm bead's energy. For a small world to be fixed, the energy that erupted was extremely tyrannical. It would directly cause a huge commotion. Even if Chu Mu and the others were to use their full strength, they would not be able to suppress it. Therefore, although Chu Mu planned to let the mystic Yang realm bead settle in the true sword sect, he did not plan to completely fix it. He only wanted to place it there first. Otherwise, the huge commotion that could not be suppressed would cause fluctuations in the outside world. It would attract the attention of others and bring unnecessary trouble to the true sword sect. Under the suppression of everyone's energy and Chu Mu's full control, the mystic Yang realm bead finally sank into the void and slowly unfolded the mystic Yang realm. The mystic Yang realm was a small world. It was a completely independent, small world that was attached to a large world. After being refined into a realm bead, it could be carried around. It could also be unfolded and attached to a large world. It would take some time, but it was not long. Not long after, Chu Mu felt the mystic Yang realm unfolding completely. However, it could not be seen with the naked eye. Other than him, it was also difficult for others to sense it with their divine soul. Unless it was an expert with profound attainments in the Tao of Space, it would be at least a 9-star saint or even a peerless expert. The Tao of Space was a very high-end Tao of heaven and earth. There were not many people who had comprehended the Tao of Space. There were even fewer cultivators who mainly cultivated the Tao of Space. Moreover, there were very few cultivators who could cultivate the Tao of Space to an extremely profound level. Therefore, the mystic Yang realm was relatively safe here. It would not be easily discovered. Moreover, as the master of the mystic Yang realm, Chu Mu would also set up some corresponding measures to isolate the detection of experts. The mystic Yang realm had not completely settled here. Therefore, other than Chu Mu, no one could easily enter or leave it. Regarding this point, Chu Mu already had some ideas. He wanted to create some tokens that could connect to the mystic Yang realm. By activating the power of the token, one could enter and leave the mystic Yang realm. However, Chu Mu had not done any in-depth research on the Tao of smithing. Therefore, he needed someone else. After speaking of this idea, the great elder volunteered himself. "Sect Master, I have studied the Tao of smithing for thousands of years. I should be able to do it." The great elder said, "Then I will have to trouble you, great elder." Chu Mu said happily, "Rest assured, Sect Master. Leave it to me." The great elder, who had lived for thousands of years, patted his chest like a young man. Soon after, he revealed an embarrassed smile. "Sect Master, but before that, can you let us enter the mystic Yang realm to take a look?" Chu Mu smiled when he heard this. He waved his right hand and a light gate appeared. Chapter 1564. Chu Mu renamed the Profound Yang Sword Realm. Previously, it belonged to the Great Profound Yang Sword Palace, but now it belonged to Chu Mu. It belonged to the True Sword Sect, so he had the final say on how to name it. Under Chu Mu's lead, all the elders entered the Profound Yang Sword Realm. After Chu Mu gave a simple introduction of the Profound Yang Sword Realm, all the saint-level experts temporarily stayed in the Profound Yang Sword Palace to cultivate. The pure and dense pure Yang Qi made the elders who entered pleasantly surprised and excited. Chu Mu did not disturb their excitement and let them get used to it first. After they calmed down, they would discuss the application of the Profound Yang Sword Realm. If a small world was not fully utilized, it would be like a decoration. It was the kind of decoration that could not be known to others. It was useless, and if the true sword sect wanted to develop and become stronger, it was closely related to the strength of the sect's elders and disciples. It was also closely related to the foundation of the sect. With an additional small world, the foundation would increase by a lot. Similarly, the foundation had to be fully utilized to increase its strength. Only then could it develop and maintain a foundation of hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. All the saint-level experts stayed in the Profound Yang Sword Realm to cultivate. Chu Mu also handed over the task of refining the Profound Yang Sword token to the Great Elder, and left the profound Yang sword realm because he had other things to do. After Gulwankong and the other two saw the sword techniques, it was as if they had obtained a treasure. All of them went into seclusion to comprehend it. Chu Mu originally wanted to find them to discuss how to carry out the mission. After all, they were sword cultivators from the ancient god realm. Their purpose in entering the deep blue world was to find the world spirit and obtain the recognition of the world spirit. From there, they would open the protective barrier of the deep blue world, allowing the sword cultivators from the ancient god realm to enter and develop resources. Now, looking at the appearance of the three fellows, they probably did not have the intention for the time being. Thinking about it, Chu Mu decided to forget about it. The mission had to be completed in the end, but there was no need to be anxious because this mission was not easy. On the contrary, it was incomparably difficult. It was still unknown whether it could be completed. Putting aside the discussion for now, Chu Mu began to work on other matters. His objective for returning to the True Sword Sect this time was to further develop the True Sword Sect and increase the overall strength of the True Sword Sect. As for his personal growth, he could only put it on hold for now. Thinking of this, Chu Mu decided to study the Tian Homistic Codex. The condensation of his primordial spirit gave him a stronger comprehension ability. His super strong learning ability was also an advantage. The return of the sect master, Chu Mu, had only caused an uproar in the True Sword Sect at first, but it quickly calmed down. However, one could clearly feel that the cultivation atmosphere in the True Sword Sect was much denser than before. Chu Mu was now the backbone of the True Sword Sect. With him here, the disciples would feel different. Those who were in seclusion, while those who were cultivating as usual. Everything seemed normal. However, before Chu Mu entered into closed-door cultivation to study the heavenly puppet secret scripture, he sent out a piece of news. The new round of the Sword Sect's disciple competition was prepared to be held a month from now, and the exact time would be notified. At this moment, it was like pouring water into a pot of boiling oil. The atmosphere in the entire True Sword Sect was incomparably intense. The cultivation atmosphere, which had already increased because of Chu Mu's return, suddenly intensified by several times. Disciples who were cultivating hard could be seen everywhere. Sword light could be seen everywhere. Some were cultivating alone, some were fighting, and some were attacking in groups. There was everything one could think of. Everything has changed since the sect master returned. Yun Feng sighed. If he wanted to enter seclusion, he would naturally choose the profound Yang sword world. Although the purpose of Chu Mu's seclusion this time was not to improve his cultivation, staying in the profound Yang sword hall to cultivate and passively accept the tempering of the pure Yang qi was also quite beneficial to his sacred body. The Boundary Monument Hall was the place with the purest and densest pure Yang qi in the entire profound Yang sword hall. This was because it was the center of the entire profound Yang sword hall, and also the center of the entire profound Yang sword world. All the Yang qi and pure Yang qi would eventually converge here. It could be said that this was an end point and also a starting point. Chu Mu had the best cultivation effects here. Even if he did not take the initiative to cultivate, the pure Yang qi that was everywhere would still temper his sacred body, imperceptibly tempering his sword origin, primordial spirit, and so on. The benefits were great. Chu Mu intended to use the Boundary Monument Hall as his exclusive place for seclusion. It would not be open to the public. With a thought, figures appeared in front of him. There were a total of 18 of them. These were all puppets. Back in the myriad ancient sacred city, there were a total of 18 one-star saint-level puppets in the first underground palace. After Chu Mu defeated them, everyone divided them. Later on, Gulwankong and the other two each obtained a heavenly puppet. Those puppets were not of much use to them, so they simply gave them to Chu Mu. These 18 one-star saint-level puppets all had their cores destroyed by Chu Mu, so they could not be activated. The purpose of Chu Mu was to study them. Studying the Tao of puppets was a combination of theory and practice. It was not something that could be grasped just by comprehending the heavenly puppet secret manual. One had to personally study the puppets, and in the end, personally create the puppets. Only then could one truly grasp it. Chu Mu intended to use these 18 one-star saint-level puppets for research purposes, to deepen his understanding and grasp of the heavenly puppet secret manual. He calmed his heart and completely forgot about everything in the outside world. He focused on comprehending the manual. His strong comprehension ability allowed him to comprehend the manual without any resistance. The origin of puppets, the theory of puppets, the structure of puppets, the principles of puppets, etc. Everything was memorized and absorbed by Chu Mu and turned into his own accumulation. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. Other than the part about heavenly puppets at the end, he had completely memorized and understood the rest of the heavenly puppet secret manual. At this point, Chu Mu had officially embarked on the Tao of Puppets. If it was someone else, they would definitely not be able to do it so quickly. They did not have Chu Mu's foundation, nor did they have Chu Mu's superb learning ability and shocking comprehension ability. 10 days ago, the 18 puppets in front of him were just 18 puppets. 10 days later, there was a completely different feeling when he looked at the 18 puppets. The structure and lines of every part were clearly presented in Chu Mu's eyes. This feeling was like a swordsmith and a non-swordsmith looking at a treasured sword. When a swordsmith looked at a treasured sword, he would look at the shape, length, width, thickness, hardness, toughness, material, method of forging, and even the lines on the surface of the sword. On the other hand, non-swordsmiths would not consider so much. To them, whether the sword was sharp enough or not was enough. Chu Mu's gaze was as sharp as a knife as he analyzed the puppets in front of him at a deeper level. The cultivation of the heavenly puppet secret manual had allowed him to officially embark on the Tao of Puppets. However, this did not mean that he had already achieved great success in the Tao of Puppets. In fact, Chu Mu could only be considered as a beginner in the Tao of Puppets. However, compared to the majority of beginners in the Tao of Puppets, Chu Mu had various advantages that they did not possess. His superb learning ability and astounding comprehension ability belonged to the last and most comprehensive inheritance of the heavenly puppet secret manual of the ancient puppet sect. All these advantages allowed Chu Mu to progress faster and gain a deeper understanding of the Tao of Puppets. Furthermore, he also had a saint-level puppet as a reference. He could analyze it and combine the theory with the real thing to learn more directly. With a grab, one of the puppets flew towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu looked it up and down carefully, studying every part of it carefully. He then combined it with the theoretical knowledge he had obtained from the heavenly puppet secret manual to analyze it. These puppets were a test left behind by the last successor of the ancient puppet sect. They were puppets that had been created to be rather perfect. The structure of every part was very particular. Chu Mu carefully studied the appearance of the puppet. When he was almost done with this one, he gained some insights and continued to study another one. He studied one puppet after another. Before long, he had finished studying all 18 of them. He had gained a deeper understanding of a small portion of the theory. Afterwards, Chu Mu's fingers began to move. They were extremely nimble as they quickly swept across one of the puppets. After studying the exterior and the proportions of every part of the puppet, it was time to study the internal structure of the puppet. However, to study the internal structure, just observing with the power of the soul was not enough. He had to dismantle the puppet into every single part. Only then would he be able to study it in a more direct manner. Chu Mu's fingers were extremely nimble, but he did not dare to relax at all. Strictly speaking, this was the first time he had dismantled a puppet. He was using the Tao of Puppets instead of brute force to destroy it. The significance of the two were completely different. The former required a sufficient understanding of puppets, as well as the corresponding theoretical knowledge as a foundation, as well as a unique insight and nimble hands. The latter only required sufficient strength. Chu Mu's eyes were extremely sharp. They shone brightly. He poured out his power of the soul at a high intensity and carefully controlled it. He did not dare to relax at all. He was very strict, extremely strict. This was his attitude. Either he did not do it, or he did it to the best of his abilities. One by one, the puppet components were dismantled by Chu Mu's nimble fingers. They were not damaged at all, because, once they were damaged, they would not be complete. It would be even more difficult for him to study them. It didn't take long for a complete puppet to be reduced to a pile of components of varying sizes. After dismantling a puppet himself, Chu Mu became even more familiar with the structure of the puppet. Sweeping his gaze across the pile of components on the ground, Chu Mu did not immediately begin studying the components. Instead, he looked at the other puppets. His nimble fingers continued to dismantle the other puppets. After some time, the remaining 17 puppets were also dismantled by Chu Mu's nimble hands. They were placed in piles. Every time he dismantled a puppet, he became more familiar with the structure of the puppet. Next, he began to familiarize himself with every single component. Chapter 1565. Generally speaking, the appearance of a puppet could be divided into human form, beast form, and strange form. Human form and beast form were easy to understand. They looked like a human or a beast, while strange form was more general. Any non-human or beast form was called strange form. Different appearances of puppets had different structures, and the proportions of each component were different. Puppets could not be imagined out of thin air. They needed a certain physical reference as a basis, and then extended according to this proportion. The length, width, thickness, hardness, toughness, and other aspects of each component had to be precisely measured. Even a fraction less or more would be considered a failure. Those who cultivated the path of puppetry were called puppeteers. The types of puppets were divided into human form, beast form, and strange form puppeteers. Each type of puppet was a complete path, and was enough for many puppeteers to spend their entire lives researching. The ancient puppet sect was a super sect that mainly cultivated the path of puppetry and involved all puppets. The Tian Ho secret manual also had the inheritance of 3 types of puppets. However, at present, Chu Mu only planned to cultivate the path of human form puppets. As for beast form and strange form, he would think about it when he had more time. The 18 one-star saint-level human form puppets were all dismantled by Chu Mu into components. Chu Mu then carefully studied each component. Human form puppets were constructed according to the proportions of a real person. Therefore, to become an excellent human form puppeteer, not only did one have to have extraordinary knowledge of puppetry, one also had to have a deep and detailed understanding of the human body. Chu Mu never lacked understanding of the human body. As a swordsman, the first thing he had to do was to understand his own body, the structure of every part, every bone, every muscle, how to move, how to exert force, and so on. This laid a solid foundation for his research on the path of human form puppetry. He studied each component one by one, combined with the theoretical knowledge of the Tian Ho secret manual, familiarity, and memory. After that, Chu Mu disrupted all the components and mixed them into a large pile. From among them, he identified the components needed to construct a puppet. This was another challenge, but not too difficult. The real difficulty had appeared. After selecting the components, he began to construct the puppet. There was a saying that it was easier to destroy than to build. The current situation was more or less the same. When dismantling the puppet, Chu Mu had used his spiritual energy to envelop the entire puppet, allowing him to see everything inside and out. However, when it came to fully constructed puppets, spiritual energy didn't have much of an effect. Staring at the pile of components in front of him, Chu Mu began to think and simulate in his mind. In fact, based on his memory of the previous dismantling, it was not difficult to reconstruct the puppet. However, that was not what Chu Mu wanted. That was just a rigid method. What he wanted was to understand and research the components, know their use, and know where they should be located, so that he could construct a complete puppet. With the combination of theoretical knowledge, the simulation in his mind became clearer and clearer. An hour later, Chu Mu's hands moved. He picked up a component and began to construct the puppet. The process of constructing was much slower than the dismantling process, but it was not difficult for Chu Mu. About an hour later, a complete puppet appeared in front of Chu Mu. After a careful inspection, he found that the puppet was very complete. There was not the slightest flaw, and it was exactly the same as before. Chu Mu revealed a smile. Once again, he began to select the remaining components and construct the puppet. Not long after, 17 one-star saint-level puppets were constructed. This process allowed Chu Mu to become more familiar with the construction of puppets. Next, Chu Mu dismantled the puppet and constructed it again, constantly familiarizing himself with the process, dismantling the construct, and repeating the process over and over again, constantly familiarizing himself with the process. At the same time, his understanding of the path of humanoid puppets in the Tian Ho secret manual also deepened. A few days later, Chu Mu could not remember how many times he had dismantled and constructed a puppet. This was because he did not deliberately memorize it. He only knew that now he could dismantle an intact puppet in a short span of 10 breaths, and he only needed 30 breaths to construct a complete puppet. It's time to move on to the next step, Chu Mu said to himself. The next step was not to take out other puppets for research. That was just a deepening of the previous steps and not a new step. The next step should be to study the core. To a puppet, the core was like a human's heart. The heart supplied blood to every part of the body, providing power. The core dictated the puppet's actions, operation, and so on. The core of these puppets was a regular octagonal prism about the size of a fist. It was quite heavy and had a texture to it. Inside the core, there were lines that resembled blood vessels and meridians, which ensured the transmission of energy. In a complete puppet, the core was the most important and also the most complex. Chu Mu focused all his attention on the core. The shape of the core could not be arbitrarily chosen. There were strict rules about the most suitable shape. After all, it was related to the transmission of energy. If the shape was suitable, the transmission of energy would be smooth, and if the shape was not suitable, the transmission of energy would be blocked. This regular, gem-like octagonal prism was the most regular shape of the core in the Tian Ho secret manual. It could be perfectly embedded in the puppet without any gaps, allowing the transmission of energy in many directions smoothly. It was fast, had little resistance, and had low consumption. Unless Chu Mu's attainments in the path of puppetry surpassed the founder of the Tian Ho secret manual, he would not be able to research a better core structure than the one he had now. For the time being, he did not have such thoughts. Chu Mu was immersed in the shape of the core, its proportions, and the internal energy circuits. The cores of these 18 one-star saint-level puppets had been damaged by his sword. When Chu Mu was almost done with his research, he also wondered if he could repair the cores. However, his current attainments were not enough. It would be very, very difficult to repair them. He continued his research and combined it with the theoretical knowledge of the Tian Ho secret manual. However, he soon got stuck. There was no other way. Chu Mu did not hesitate and directly destroyed one of the cores. After destroying it, he broke it into pieces so that he could better study the internal structure. Destroying one core after another, Chu Mu destroyed a total of 10 cores. Only then did he have a deeper understanding of the core. "It's time to try to create a puppet myself," he muttered to himself. He took out some materials that he did not think were very precious and began to create them. He melted the materials, purified them, and fused them together. Then, using his powerful spiritual power and the method of creating puppet components, he created components from these purified and fused materials. This was his first time creating a puppet. Chu Mu did not bite off more than he could chew. Instead, he first created the components according to the proportions of the puppets that he had disassembled countless times. One by one, The components appeared under his nimble hands. Half a day later, a pile of brand new components appeared in front of him. The next step was the most difficult one, which was to create the core. Usually, one core per puppet was very important. Chu Mu's attainments in the core were still relatively shallow. He took out a piece of pure yang stone and used it as the center to construct the outer shape of the core. This was relatively easy and was done very quickly. The difficult part was the structure of the energy circuit inside the core. In order to completely come into contact with the pure yang stone, he needed to use his spiritual power and sword origin. The combination of spiritual power and sword origin was not a problem for Chu Mu. However, the energy circuit was very complicated and could not be constructed casually. There were many factors that had to be considered. Not long after, Chu Mu constructed a core. As for whether it would work, he did not know. It still needed to be tested. He constructed the components and finally embedded the core. In terms of appearance, this puppet's proportions were similar to a normal person's. Its appearance was ordinary and there was nothing special about it. This was Chu Mu's first puppet creation. After carefully studying the outer shape, Chu Mu nodded. For him to be able to do this for the first time, it was very good. He activated the pure yang stone's power in the core. The pure yang stone's power immediately passed through the energy circuit and spread out of the core. The puppet's dim eyes suddenly lit up. Just as the red light was about to shoot out, it suddenly trembled. It seemed that there was some obscure sound, and the bright eyes dimmed once more. He had failed. Chu Mu wasn't discouraged. For someone like him who was a beginner in the path of puppets, to be able to reach this stage on his first attempt was unprecedented. Even in the ancient puppet sect, those extremely outstanding genius disciples couldn't do it. After taking down the core and studying it, he found that a dozen or so of the energy circuits inside had been destroyed. After carefully studying it, Chu Mu knew that the reason those energy circuits were destroyed was because of the pure yang stone's power. The main reason was that the structure of the energy circuits was not perfect enough, so they could not withstand the power of the impact. If he knew the reason, he would know how to improve it. Chu Mu once again took out the materials to create the core. No matter what path one cultivated, one needed to have the spirit of research and a peaceful attitude. There was no need to fear problems, only problems that could not be discovered. The first time he constructed the core, he failed because the strength of the energy circuits was not enough. They could not withstand the impact of the pure yang stone's power. Of course, if he used a weaker energy stone, things would be better, but Chu Mu planned to do even better. The second time he constructed the core, he also failed because of the energy circuit's problem. The strength was improved, barely enough, but it was not stable enough. The third time he constructed the core, he also failed because the energy transmission could not last for a long time. He failed 5 times in a row, all because of the energy circuits. Failure after failure didn't affect Chu Mu. Instead, it allowed him to delve deeper into his research. After the 6th time he constructed the core, Chu Mu embedded it into the puppet's body. It was located in a place similar to a human's heart. Then he used a component to seal it and protect it. There was anticipation in his heart because he had a feeling that this time he would not fail again. The pure yang stone's power was stimulated. As it circulated through the energy circuits, it immediately spread throughout the puppet's body. The puppet's eyes lit up, emitting a sharp light. Chapter 1566. If I can cultivate here, I'm sure I'll be able to form a pure yang saint body in 100 years. An elder of the true sword sect said in the profound yang sword hall. He had been here for quite some time now. Every day, he would absorb the pure yang qi to cultivate. He could feel his sword essence, his blood qi, his physique, and his primordial spirit being tempered by the pure yang qi, becoming increasingly pure. The effects of the blood qi and physique were the most obvious. They could feel the improvement in just a few days. It was more stimulating than usual. I've been stuck in the 6-star saint realm for more than 100 years, but I haven't been able to break through. It's not that I don't want to break through, but I'm limited by my primordial spirit. The first elder sighed. His cultivation talent wasn't very good, but it was still okay. He was able to achieve what he had today because of luck and hard work. However, he couldn't break through due to the limitations of his primordial spirit. He smiled excitedly. It's different now. With the refinement of the pure yang qi, my primordial spirit will be able to break through to the 4th level within 10 years. At that time, I'll be able to break through to the 7th level of the Aeon realm. 1st to 3rd level primordial spirits were black iron primordial spirits. 4th to 6th level primordial spirits were bronze primordial spirits. If a low-level saint wanted to break through to the mid-level saint realm, he would need a 2nd level primordial spirit. If a mid-level saint wanted to break through to the high-level saint realm, he would need a 4th level primordial spirit. The elders were overjoyed when they heard the first elder's words. Once the first elder broke through to the 7th level of the Aeon realm, he would be a high-level saint realm expert. The strength of the True Sword sect would increase a little. Currently, the True Sword sect was a quasi-second-rate power. However, if the first elder's cultivation broke through to the 7th level of the Aeon realm, the True Sword sect could be considered a second-rate power. Even if it was the weakest of the second-rate powers, it would still be better than a quasi-second-rate power. Congratulations, First Elder. Everyone congratulated him. All of this is thanks to the sect master. Without the sect master, there wouldn't be the True Sword sect now, the First Elder said. In the Boundary Steel Hall, Chu Mu was standing. There was a figure in front of him. The figure was walking faster and faster until he started running. Soon after, it waved its hands and twisted its body, making all sorts of movements. At first, his movements were a little stiff and uncoordinated, but as his movements gradually became more proficient, it was a puppet that Chu Mu had personally created. It was also the first product that Chu Mu had made after stepping onto the path of puppetry. The thought stopped, and the moving puppet paused, becoming a statue. Chu Mu couldn't help but be speechless. Although the puppet was successfully constructed and could move, it was different from what he had imagined. It actually required him to control it before it could truly move. Chu Mu also accepted the reality. After all, the earliest puppets were like this. They needed to be controlled before they could move. After that, there were puppets that could move on their own. After that, there were puppets with spiritual intelligence. After that, there were heavenly puppets. It was not surprising that Chu Mu, who had just stepped onto the path of puppetry, was able to create the lowest level of puppets. Furthermore, this puppet was only equivalent to the level of a divine condensation realm cultivator. Firstly, Chu Mu's ability to create puppets was still relatively low, and secondly, the materials used to create puppets were relatively ordinary. He continued to research and create puppets. After a few days, Chu Mu created a new puppet. His technique had improved and was even more perfect. Its strength had reached the level of a low-level Nirvana realm cultivator, but it still required his own will to control it. However, it was still an improvement. As time passed, Chu Mu continued to research and create puppets, one after another. With his powerful learning ability and incomparably high comprehension ability, Chu Mu had a higher efficiency no matter what he learned or comprehended. Time flew by quickly. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed since Chu Mu entered the Boundary Steel Hall to comprehend the heavenly puppet mystic canon. This month was a month that was in full swing. The disciples of the True Sword sect worked very hard in their cultivation. Because of the motivation of having a direct goal, their improvements were very obvious. Within the profound Yang Sword Hall, the spirit of the martial saints seemed to have improved quite a bit. Each of them had been in the eternal realm for at least 100 years, and some had been in the eternal realm for thousands of years. They had never cultivated any primordial spirit secret technique, nor had they cultivated in any place that could help in tempering their primordial spirit. They had relied on their own efforts and the accumulation of time. using the improvement of their cultivation base and their usual hard work to drive the progress of their primordial spirit. The effect was very weak. Now, after continuously absorbing pure yang qi for a month to temper their primordial spirit, they naturally felt that the effect was very obvious. The tempering of their primordial spirit had clearly improved, as if their potential had been unlocked. The feeling was very good, and their spirit had also strengthened. Inside the boundary steel hall, figures stood one after another. They were the puppets that Chu Mu had created. There were a total of 9 of them. These puppets were at the divine condensation realm, low-level nirvana realm, mid-level nirvana realm, and the last one was at the high-level nirvana realm. This meant that Chu Mu was becoming more and more proficient in the creation of puppets. Most importantly, Chu Mu had entered the second step in the creation of puppets, which were puppets that did not have intelligence but could move on their own. Although the puppets of the second step could move on their own, there were limitations. After all, they did not have intelligence. However, it was enough for battle. Such an achievement showed that Chu Mu had made great progress in the Tao of Puppets. The research of the Tao of Puppets had come to an end for the time being. Chu Mu came out of seclusion and announced that the sex grand competition would be held as scheduled in half a month's time. Following that, he said a few words of encouragement to the disciples, as if he was giving them a shot of adrenaline, making them even more excited. Gu Wancong and the other 2 had also come out of seclusion, but they were now in seclusion again. There was nothing special that needed Chu Mu to deal with, and there was no news in the outside world that was worth paying attention to. Chu Mu wandered around outside for a while, then re-entered the profound Yang sword world and went to see the elders first. Sect Master. The elders hurriedly bowed to Chu Mu. No need for formalities. Chu Mu smiled and said, "Elders, your complexions have become better this month. It's all thanks to the profound Yang sword world that Sect Master brought back." The great elder sighed. Then he took out a few dozen tokens and gave them to Chu Mu. "Sect Master, the first batch of tokens is done." "Yes, just refine this batch for the time being," Chu Mu said. Then Chu Mu mobilized the power of the profound Yang sword world and divided it into a few dozen strands. He wrapped the dozens of tokens and began to refine them. Not long after, the tokens were completely refined. They all turned golden red and emitted pure yang energy fluctuations. Chu Mu handed over a dozen tokens to the elders. "Refine them. In the future, you will be able to freely enter and exit the profound Yang sword world from the coordinates left behind in the Sect Master's Great Hall." Chu Mu said, "In addition, in half a month's time, the Sect's grand competition will begin. Elders, you will have to be busy during this period of time. In addition, I will have to trouble you to organize these things. In the future, they will be the resources for the development of our true sword sect." After saying that, Chu Mu's figure disappeared. In this place, he was the ruler. He could appear and disappear at will, leaving behind hundreds of spatial rings. As for what to do, it would be up to the elders to think about it. The hundreds of spatial rings blinded the eyes of all the elders. These were all the spoils of war that Chu Mu had obtained over the years. He had already taken away those that were useful to him. Most of them were left behind. Next, Chu Mu began to create a large number of puppets. He had an idea, and that was to create enough sword puppets. A portion of them could be used to guard the true sword sect, and a portion could be used as a training ground for the disciples to increase their combat experience. The first thing he considered was not to guard the true sword sect, but to use the puppets for training. Origin realm puppets, God condensation realm puppets, and Nirvana realm puppets. With Chu Mu's current attainments in the Tao of Puppets and his other abilities, it was not difficult to create 3 types of puppets. The components were constantly created, and the cores were also constantly created. There were millions of pure yang stones, and every single one of them contained an enormous amount of energy. It was completely comparable to the energy of a low-level Saint Realm expert, and was more than enough to power the Origin Realm, God Congealing Realm, and Nirvana Realm puppets. The Origin Realm puppets were the easiest to create. In just a few days, Chu Mu had created dozens of them. They were divided into low-level Origin Realm, mid-level Origin Realm, high-level Origin Realm, and peak-level Origin Realm puppets. Next, he began to create God Condensation Realm puppets. Finally, he created Nirvana Realm puppets. God Condensation Realm puppets were also divided into low-level, mid-level, high-level, and peak-level puppets. Nirvana Realm puppets were divided into First Sky, Second Sky, and Third Sky. Currently, the highest was Seventh Sky. Chu Mu then spent some time studying the puppet array. The puppet array left behind by the Heavenly Puppet Secret Manual was very detailed. It was divided into 9 levels. Chu Mu was studying the first-level puppet array. A first-level puppet array required 18 puppets of the same strength to form. However, this was not absolute. Chu Mu discovered that the first-level puppet array could actually be simplified. Under simplification, although the power would be weakened, the number of puppets required would also decrease. Under his research, half a month passed very quickly. Unfortunately, the time was too short. Otherwise, he could create more puppets and further simplify the first-level puppet array. When the time was up, he had to come out of seclusion to oversee the situation and motivate the disciples. After the sect grand competition, he would spend some more time studying the Tao of puppets. At the very least, he would try his best to increase the defensive power of the True Sword sect. When the time was up, the disciples began to mobilize. Previously, under Chu Mu's instructions, the elders were very attentive. They wanted to make this sect grand competition even better than the previous one. The sect grand competition was still divided into 3 levels. There were the inner disciples, elite disciples, and core disciples. Each level was presided over by an elder. The sect grand competition was divided into preliminary, semifinals, and finals. When the finals came, the 3 levels would take turns. Chapter 1567. The sect competition was held as scheduled. The process was not unexpected at all. It was very enthusiastic. In the sect competition held 2 years ago, most of the disciples had just entered the sect and hadn't practiced the sect sword techniques and so on. Their strength wasn't as strong as it was now. In addition, the True Sword sect was only in the beginning stages of development. In all aspects, it couldn't be compared to now. Therefore, the sect competition this time was even more intense. The cultivation of the disciples was higher and stronger, so it was naturally more interesting and exciting. From the beginning to the end of the sect competition, it took a total of 15 days. Since it was a large competition, there had to be rewards. Only then would it be able to better motivate the disciples and stimulate their fighting spirit. The top 100 inner disciples, the top 30 elite disciples, and the top 10 core disciples were all rewarded. Moreover, the rewards were even more generous than the sect competition 2 years ago. Because in these 2 years, Chu Mu had killed many strong enemies and obtained a large amount of spoils of war. The weakest of these enemies was at the high level of the Nirvana realm, and many of them were Saint Realm experts. Each of their collections were not bad, and some of them were very rich. When they were combined, the elders of the True Sword sect were very shocked. They thought that their sect master had directly robbed a large sect. Of course, the collection of a large sect could not only be this. This was just an exaggeration, but it also showed how rich Chu Mu's harvest was. The top 3 of the inner disciples, elite disciples, and core disciples all obtained the qualifications to enter the spirit pool to cultivate. Chu Mu had already broken through and become a Saint Realm expert of the Eternal Realm. The spirit pool was of no help to him, so he planned to leave it in the True Sword sect as a reward for the outstanding disciples of the True Sword sect. It would better stimulate the disciples' passion for cultivation, and also improve the disciples' sense of belonging to the True Sword sect. The spirit pool was not placed in the profound Yang Sword world. The profound Yang Sword world was still an important small world that could not be known to the outside world, and could not even be known to the disciples. The spirit pool was also very important. It was enough to cause others to covet it. Thus, the location where the spirit pool was placed was rather secretive. Furthermore, there were 99 layers of seals. Even mid-level saints would not be able to break through it easily. As for high-level saints, they had their own pride. Under normal circumstances, they would not attempt to steal it. Of course, Chu Mu would also take further safety measures to ensure that the spirit pool was safe within the true sword sect. The spirit pool was split into 3 uses. This time, the top 3 inner sect disciples of the great sect competition were the first to enter, because when entering the spirit pool, it was best to be naked so as to better absorb the spirit energy. Considering the difference between men and women, the spirit pool was also sealed by Chu Mu. It was divided into 3 small sections, and each person entered one section without disturbing each other. They couldn't see each other, and their divine remembrance couldn't sense each other. When the 3 inner sect disciples came out of the spiritual pool, there was an uproar. Originally, the cultivation of these 3 inner sect disciples was at the peak of the great circle of the origin realm. It was possible for them to break through to the divine condensation realm, but they still needed some time. Unexpectedly, after cultivating in the spirit pool, not only did the 3 of them successfully break through to the divine condensation realm, they even reached the peak of the minor completion realm. They were only a step away from Deshang. Furthermore, the aura they emitted was very pure and stable. There was no sign of instability in their foundations due to their rapid advancement. It gave people the feeling that they had gone through a long period of hard work to cultivate and purify their sword energy. Aside from the rapid advancement in their cultivation, their physiques had also been strengthened by several times. Their strength was even more tyrannical than when they broke through on their own. These 3 inner sect disciples were also promoted to elite disciples because of the breakthrough in their cultivation. Then it was the turn of the 3 elite disciples. They entered the spiritual pool and enjoyed the nourishment of the pure spiritual qi. Absorbing the spiritual qi to cultivate, their cultivation rapidly broke through. Their foundations were solid, and their physiques were even more tyrannical. The 3 elite disciples were originally at the peak of the great circle of the God condensation realm. After the 3 of them left the spiritual pool, their cultivation had all broken through and reached the middle stage of the first sky of the nirvana realm. In an instant, they had saved several years of cultivation time. Moreover, their sword energy was pure, their foundations were solid, and their status as core disciples rose. Going from the peak of the great circle of the origin realm to the peak of the minor completion realm of the God condensation realm would only take about 2 years for a cultivator with decent talent. However, going from the peak of the great circle of the God condensation realm to the middle stage of the first sky of the nirvana realm would take at least 3 years. A single cultivation in the spiritual pool and a direct breakthrough was equivalent to saving 2 to 3 years of time. For cultivators with talent, 2 to 3 years was enough to leave their peers in the dust. Finally, it was the turn of the 3 core disciples. Among the 3 core disciples, 2 were at the peak of the 6th sky of the nirvana realm, while the other was at the early stage of the 6th sky of the nirvana realm. Seeing the improvement of the 6 inner disciples and elite disciples, their hearts were filled with anticipation. When a nirvana realm cultivator entered the spiritual pool, they would naturally consume more spiritual qi. The more spiritual qi they consumed, the more treasures they would consume. However, the 6 people who entered the spiritual pool the first 2 times had only absorbed a small portion of the spiritual qi. To them, spiritual qi was a very high-end energy. Their own cultivation was too low, so their absorption and refinement was limited. A small portion would be absorbed and refined to increase their cultivation. A small portion would nourish and strengthen their physique, and a small portion would be hidden within their bodies. As they cultivated and developed in the future, it would allow their cultivation to increase faster than usual for a period of time until the hidden spiritual power was exhausted. The remaining spiritual qi in the spiritual pool was enough for the third batch of disciples to absorb and refine. It was different for the Nirvana realm. Especially for the sixth sky of the Nirvana realm, they already had enough ability to refine even more spiritual qi. When the spiritual pool was filled with spiritual qi, it was enough for Chu Mu to advance from the sixth sky of the Nirvana realm to the seventh sky of the Nirvana realm. However, Chu Mu was different from ordinary cultivators. His dantian had undergone a mutation and was 10 times bigger. The divine wilderness sword essence was incomparably pure. Therefore, the amount of spiritual qi that Chu Mu consumed to break through to the first sky of the Nirvana realm was enough for the 3/6 sky of the Nirvana realm disciples to absorb and refine. The 3 core disciples had only been in the spiritual pool for a short day, but the heaven-earth yuan qi began to gather from all directions. It condensed into yuan qi clouds in the sky as they underwent the nirvana tribulation. The spiritual qi was extremely pure. Their physiques and meridians were far from being comparable to Chu Mu's. They could only withstand a limited amount of spiritual qi and were unable to withstand it for a long period of time. Although it was only a short day, it was still longer than the previous 2 batches. The nirvana tribulation passed without any accidents. The 2-peak 6th sky of the nirvana realm successfully broke through to the middle 7th sky of the nirvana realm, while the early 6th sky of the nirvana realm reached the early 7th sky of the nirvana realm. In just a few days, the 9 disciples had broken through to the nirvana realm. Their strength had improved tremendously, and it was obvious to everyone, especially when Chu Mu announced that the sect tournament would be held again in 3 years, and that the top 10 would be able to enter the spiritual pool to cultivate. All the disciples seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. The elders sighed with emotion. The moment Chu Mu returned, he immediately caused the passion of the true sword sect disciples to rise by several levels. This was something that they could not do. With such a sect master, the true sword sect had nothing to worry about. In the blink of an eye, another month had passed since the sect tournament. During this month, other than creating puppets, Chu Mu also studied the puppet array and made obvious progress. He took out the other saint-level puppets. Among them, 15 were 2-star saint-level puppets, 12 were 3-star saint-level puppets, 9 were 4-star saint-level puppets, 6 were 5-star saint-level puppets, and 3 were 6-star saint-level puppets. These saint-level puppets were all intact. As long as the sword origin in the core that blocked the energy transmission was removed, they could be activated again. Next, Chu Mu spent another 2.5 months dismantling these saint-level puppets, one by one. He carefully studied the structure of the components and the core. He discovered that the higher the level of the puppet, the finer the structure of the components. It was impossible to distinguish them with the naked eye, and the energy circuit of the core was even finer and more complicated. These 2.5 months could be said to be the time when Chu Mu had advanced by leaps and bounds on the Tao of puppetry. This was because he had even dismantled the 6-star saint-level puppets for research and reconstructed them based on his understanding of puppets. Just think about it, which person who cultivated the Tao of puppetry would have the same qualifications as Chu Mu to dismantle saint-level puppets for research? Next, Chu Mu tried to create more puppets himself. This time, the puppets he created barely reached the level of 1-star saint-level puppets. It was a huge improvement from the nirvana realm to the saint level. It was similar to the leap from the nirvana realm to the eternal realm. Such an improvement gave Chu Mu a sense of accomplishment. A sense of accomplishment was not a real thing, but it was still useful to a cultivator. At the very least, it could increase a cultivator's confidence. A cultivator without confidence would not be able to achieve anything great no matter how talented they were. After a period of consolidation, the puppets he created truly reached the level of 1-star saint-level puppets. Chu Mu created a few more cores and embedded them into the original 1-star saint-level puppets so that the 18 puppets could be used again. Chu Mu did not intend to go further on the Tao of puppetry. He mainly cultivated the Tao of swords. He had already spent a few months on the Tao of puppetry. It was enough for him to personally create 1-star saint-level puppets. Next, Chumu had to consider how to make better use of these puppets. Keeping them in his hands was just a collection. Only by using them could the value of these puppets be brought out. There were a total of 6 types of puppets, from 1 star to 6 star. In the case of forming a puppet formation, they could display a more powerful strength that could at least cross 2 stars. In other words, the strongest 3 6-star saint-level puppets could form a level 6 puppet formation that had the strength of an 8-star saint-level expert. In the entire True Sword sect, there was not even a 7-star saint-level expert. There was no doubt that this was a huge power. Chumu had to make good use of it. Chapter 1568. There were 6 levels of puppet formations. A level 1 puppet formation was suitable for 1-star martial saints, while a level 6 puppet formation was suitable for 6-star martial saints. There was a strict distinction between the levels of puppet formations in the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Manual. If the puppet's level was not high enough, it would not be able to withstand the operation of the puppet formation of the corresponding level. On the other hand, if the puppet's level was higher than the puppet formation's level, it would require more puppets. For example, if a 6-star martial saint puppet was to set up a level 5 puppet formation, it would require 6 6-star martial saint puppets. The final strength would be at the level of an 8-star martial saint. However, because of the difference of 1 level, it would require double the number of puppets. If a level 6 puppet formation was used, 6 6-star martial saint puppets would be able to set up 2, which would be equivalent to 2 8-star martial saints. After thinking about it, Chumu made a temporary arrangement. 3 6-star martial saint puppets would form a level 6 puppet formation to guard the spiritual pool. The spiritual pool was not very useful to an individual, especially for those below the eternal realm. The limitations were obvious. However, it was very important to a sect. Even for a super sect, their disciples were mainly at the deity condensation realm and nirvana realm. The spiritual pool's usefulness was obvious. As for the remaining saint puppets, Chumu temporarily used them as a place for the sect's saint experts to cultivate. A level 1 puppet array formed by 18 1-star saint level puppets would have the strength of a 3-star saint level. This would allow the 3-star saint level experts in the sect to fight well. Correspondingly, a level 4 puppet array formed by a 4-star saint level puppet array could fight against a 6-star saint level expert. Next, Chumu used a few more months to create more puppets. Some of them were 1-star martial saints, while the rest were below the martial saint level. During this time, he had people open up a cave residence in the mountains. Chumu's idea was to use the origin realm, deity condensation realm, and nirvana realm puppets to create a puppet trial ground. He would name it the Puppet Cave. The disciples of the True Sword sect could challenge the Puppet Cave. As long as they could pass through the Puppet Cave, they would be rewarded handsomely. That way, not only could they increase their battle experience and deepen their grasp of sword arts, they could also be rewarded handsomely. For the True Sword sect, the Puppet Cave was a clear sign of improvement. Led by Chumu and assisted by the other elders, after nearly a month of racking their brains, the Puppet Cave was finally completed. The 3 words Puppet Cave shone brightly above the entrance of the cave. They were personally written by Chumu, using the eternal spiritual sword to carve them. They contain the profoundness of the sword Tao. After returning this time, Chumu would also put in a lot of effort for the development of the real sword sect. After the completion of the Puppet Cave, he planned to temporarily let go. For example, how to operate the Puppet Cave, how to reward them, and so on. These were all left to the elders. As the master of a sect, he only needed to grasp the general direction. Inside the Boundary Steel Hall, Chumu was comprehending the last part of the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Canon. The reason why the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Canon was called the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Canon was because the last part was related to heavenly puppets. Chu Mu had not touched upon the last part of the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Canon until now. The content of this part was an introduction to heavenly puppets, their origins, their abilities, and so on. Following that was the structure of heavenly puppets, the creation of heavenly puppets, and a series of profound content. Strictly speaking, the structure of heavenly puppets was clearly different from ordinary puppets. Ordinary puppets generally only needed one core, and the interior was firm. However, heavenly puppets were hollow inside, and there was more than one core. The reason why it was different was because the creation of heavenly puppets was different from ordinary puppets. When the geniuses of the ancient puppet sect created heavenly puppets, their goal was to let people personally control heavenly puppets, allowing them to possess greater strength. Later on, heavenly puppets gained sentience, which was an accident. Because of this accident, the ancient puppet sect saw a possibility. After thousands of years of research, they finally came up with a method to give heavenly puppet sentience. This method was equivalent to a secret technique, the Burning Spirit Awakening technique. This was the secret technique that gave heavenly puppet sentience. It was a rather peculiar and evil secret technique. Even though they had developed the Burning Spirit Awakening technique, the ancient puppet sect could only create a few dozen heavenly puppets due to the limitations of materials. Furthermore, the success rate of the Burning Spirit Awakening technique was not 100%. In addition, the method was rather evil. In the end, only a few heavenly puppets in the ancient puppet sect successfully gained sentience and became complete heavenly puppets. Chu Mu finished reading the contents of the origin and creation of heavenly puppets. He did not intend to create heavenly puppets. At least with his current attainments in puppetry, he was far from being able to create heavenly puppets. If he wanted to reach that level, Chu Mu would have to be willing to spend a few decades on the path of puppetry. Furthermore, creating heavenly puppets required a large amount of precious metals. He had a portion of such metals, but he also lacked a portion. The key was the Burning Spirit Awakening technique. There were two parts to the Burning Spirit Awakening technique. One was the mantra, and the other was the hand seals. The two had to work together for it to be effective. The reason why the Burning Spirit Awakening technique was said to be evil was because it required the use of the primordial spirit. Yes, in order to give heavenly puppet sentience, the primordial spirit must be used as the raw material to execute the Burning Spirit Awakening technique. The burning spirit in the Burning Spirit Awakening technique meant to burn the primordial spirit. The primordial spirit was something that only martial saints possessed. It was the most important part of a martial saint and could not be missing. If the primordial spirit was burned, it was equivalent to complete death. Killing the primordial spirit was a rather evil method. Once the outside world knew about it, it would cause a lot of trouble. It might even become a public enemy and be besieged. Even with the ancient puppet sect's strength, they could not bear such consequences. Moreover, it might not be difficult to kill a martial saint as long as one's strength was much stronger than the other party. However, if one wanted to capture the other party's primordial spirit, the difficulty would increase by 100 times. Lastly, the Burning Spirit Awakening technique had a success rate. If one's luck was good, one might be able to successfully awaken the heavenly puppet once and give birth to a trace of sentience. If one's luck was not good, one might need to use it twice, thrice, 4, 5, or even more than 10 times. The amount of primordial spirit consumed was immeasurable. With Chu Mu's ability, although the Burning Spirit Awakening technique was profound and mysterious, he still managed to learn and grasp it in a short period of time. After familiarizing himself with it, Chu Mu took out 3 heavenly puppets. After obtaining the ancient puppet sect's inheritance, he obtained a total of 7 heavenly puppets. He gave one to Gu Luankong and the other 2. He planned to keep the heavenly puppet that he named Tian Huang first. The other 3 heavenly puppets had no other use at the moment. They could be used to awaken sentience and become real heavenly puppets. The 3 heavenly puppets were lined up in a row. Chu Mu did not need to go out to hunt for primordial spirits, because there were more than 200 primordial spirits hidden in a side hall of the profound Yang Sword Hall. With a thought, more than 200 primordial spirits appeared in the Boundary Monument Hall. Chu Mu did not know how many primordial spirits would be needed to awaken 3 heavenly puppets and give birth to a trace of sentience. Perhaps more than 200 primordial spirits would be enough, or perhaps not. However, he had to give it a try. He took a deep breath and adjusted his breathing. He adjusted his essence, energy, and spirit to the most perfect state. Then he recalled the contents of the Burning Spirit Awakening technique and began to cast it on one of the heavenly puppets. As he waved his hands, he formed a series of hand seals. His sword energy and spiritual energy circulated according to the unique mental cultivation method of the Burning Spirit Awakening technique, turning into a brand new energy. That energy was restless, as if it could ignite everything. Immediately, a primordial spirit flew up and was struck by the power of the Burning Spirit Awakening technique. It burned as if it was ignited. Gradually, it turned into a pure energy and spread out, wrapping around the heavenly puppet that used the soft sword. Wisps of pure energy wrapped around the heavenly puppet like smoke. It was as if it was in the clouds, adding a bit of mystery. Soon, the first primordial spirit was completely burned. However, the heavenly puppet did not show any signs of sentience. Chu Mu could only immediately burn the second primordial spirit and continue. Third, fourth, fifth, one after another, the primordial spirits were burned. Wisps of smoke lingered. Finally, the heavenly puppet's lightless eyes flickered and quickly dimmed. The 6th primordial spirit was burned. Finally, the light in the heavenly puppet's eyes flickered. It was very weak, like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. However, it stubbornly persisted in the end. After the 6th primordial spirit was burned, the light in the heavenly puppet's eyes was weak. Chu Mu immediately smiled. Success! Under the nourishment of the 6 primordial spirits, the heavenly puppet finally gave birth to a sliver of sentience. The Burning Spirit Awakening technique would not have any effect on other puppets. It was only effective on heavenly puppets because the structure of heavenly puppets was different. It could be said that the Burning Spirit Awakening technique was a secret technique created based on the special structure of heavenly puppets. The burning of 6 primordial spirits had enlightened a heavenly puppet with a sliver of sentience. Chu Mu's luck was pretty good. As soon as he relaxed, Chu Mu discovered that he had used up a lot of energy. He could not use the Burning Spirit Awakening technique a second time. He could only recover first. After a heavenly puppet gained sentience, its sentience would slowly grow with the passage of time. This would often take a very long time, decades, or even centuries. However, if he continued to burn the primordial spirits and nourish the sliver of sentience, he could greatly shorten the time. After his energy had completely recovered, Chu Mu used the Burning Spirit Awakening technique a second time. This time he burned 7 primordial spirits. It ended in failure. Chu Mu's sword origin and spiritual energy were almost exhausted. He recovered once more and continued using it. The third time he used the Burning Spirit Awakening technique, he burned 7 primordial spirits and still failed. After adjusting his state of mind and recovering his energy, he used the 4th level. This time, he burned 5 primordial spirits and successfully enlightened a second heavenly puppet. There was only one left. At this point, he had enlightened 2 heavenly puppets and burned a total of 25 primordial spirits. There were still over 200 primordial spirits left. Looking at the situation, it was enough to enlighten the last heavenly puppet. Incidentally, I would like to recommend a book written by a friend. It is called Sovereign of 10,000 Swords. 16 years ago, the #1 expert of Heavenly Sword Continent, Shirley, perished in the God's Fall mountain range. The dazzling sword of Gojosian was on the verge of collapse. The 5 sovereigns were separated from the world. 16 years later, a foolish youth of Cloud Sea Academy awakened his past life's memories. The sword sovereign, Shirley, returned with a mighty force. This was a prosperous world where 10,000 swords rose. Geniuses were destined not to be lonely. This was a turbulent era where heroes contended for hegemony. The weak could only be obliterated. An azure-clothed youth with a black sword case in hand rose from the lowest position. Let's see how he overturned the winds and clouds, sweeping through the sovereigns and becoming the sovereign of 10,000 swords. Chapter 1569. Over 200 souls had been reduced to around 150 in the end. He had only succeeded in enlightening the 3rd heavenly puppet after expending an extremely large amount of souls. The 3 heavenly puppets stood before him. The eyes of each heavenly puppet flickered with a weak light. It was the light that represented intelligence. The 3 heavenly puppets all possessed a sliver of intelligence now, but they were still unable to move because they lacked energy. Chu Mu took out a few dozen pure yang crystals and embedded them into the heavenly puppets. Each heavenly puppet had 18 pure yang crystals, creating a complete energy circuit. Although the pure yang crystals contained abundant energy, and each crystal was comparable to the energy of a 7-star Saint rank expert, they were still extremely powerful. 18 pure yang crystals were equivalent to the energy of 17 7-star saints. It was enough for the heavenly puppets to use for quite a long time. Even so, there would be a day when they would run out of energy. The heavenly puppets that had gained intelligence were different. They could use the energy within their bodies to cultivate, absorbing the energy of the world outside and converting it into their own energy. At the same time, they would gradually change their state of existence, constantly improving themselves. As a result, their bodies would become stronger and the power they possessed would become greater and greater. However, that would take a very long time. They were puppets after all. No matter how extraordinary they were, they would still have their limitations. However, compared to other puppets, these heavenly puppets had already surpassed them by far, far too much. They've only gained a sliver of intelligence right now. They can't move as they please, nor can they cultivate as they please. It'll take at least a few dozen years or even 100 years for this sliver of intelligence to become complete. That's far too long, Chu Mu thought. Afterwards, he looked at the remaining souls and made a decision. After recovering the energy he had expended, he used the Burning Spirit Awakening technique again. The Burning Spirit Awakening technique had 2 uses. The first was naturally to enlighten the heavenly puppets, allowing them to gain intelligence. The second was to burn the souls to nourish the sliver of intelligence in the heavenly puppets that had already gained intelligence, allowing the sliver of intelligence to grow faster and become complete faster. One by one, the origin souls were burned by the burning Soul Spirit Awakening art. They turned into pure energy that wrapped around one of the heavenly puppets. As the origin souls burned and were nourished by the energy, the light in the eyes of the heavenly puppet that used the soft sword gradually brightened. This meant that its intelligence was also increasing. Chu Mu stayed in Boundary Steel Hall. Day after day passed. His essence divinities burned up one by one. When their energy was exhausted, they would recover. When they recovered, they would burn up again. This cycle repeated. Finally, after burning 100 primordial spirits, the light in the heavenly puppet's eyes reached a level that was neither weak nor strong. Chu Mu breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, he felt his scalp tingle. If one were to divide the intelligence of the heavenly puppets, it could be divided into 4 levels. Entry, small success, Deshang, and great perfection. Reaching great perfection meant that the intelligence was complete, just like an intelligent human. When they had just gained a sliver of intelligence, the intelligence of the 3 heavenly puppets was already at the entry level. Now, after burning 100 primordial spirits, the intelligence of the soft sword heavenly puppet had risen to the next level. It had reached the small success stage and had even reached the peak of the small success stage. It was only a step away from Deshang. The peak of the small success stage was not enough. Chu Mu continued to burn the remaining 50 over primordial spirits. As they burned, they turned into energy to nourish the puppet. Suddenly, the eyes of the heavenly puppet shot out an extremely sharp light. It gushed out and then calmed down and became round again. Its intelligence had reached the level of Deshang. Master. A voice sounded. The soft sword heavenly puppet's mouth moved slightly. It was a little stiff and a little obscure. Its voice was also not clear enough. However, Chu Mu could hear it clearly. The heavenly puppet secret manual clearly stated that when a heavenly puppet with intelligence reached a certain level of intelligence, it would be able to speak. Speaking was a sign that a heavenly puppet's intelligence was beginning to mature. It was also the beginning of a heavenly puppet's ability to cultivate on its own. The structure of a heavenly puppet was very similar to a human body. After its intelligence matured, its eyes would be able to see like a human, and its mouth would be able to open and close like a human. It was completely equivalent to a metallic human. As for calling Chu Mu master, the reason was very simple. Whoever used the great art of burning spirit and awakening to awaken the heavenly puppet with intelligence would be recognized as its master. This was a method used to create the heavenly puppet. It was a setting and also a kind of mystery. In the future, you will follow my surname Chu, and your name will be Tsongfeng, Chu Mu said with a smile. He was very excited. This kind of feeling could not be clearly expressed in words. Thank you for the name, Master. The soft sword heavenly puppet's second sentence was smoother than the first. It was like a person who had just learned how to speak. At the beginning, he could not speak well. However, as long as he spoke boldly and was willing to speak, he would slowly improve. This was also applicable to the heavenly puppet. However, the process was shortened countless times. Your words are getting better and better. Chu Mu could clearly distinguish and smiled. All of this made him feel very familiar and very fresh. Thank you for the compliment, Master. Chu Tsongfeng's eyes flashed slightly as he said with his mouth opening and closing. One was a heavenly puppet that had just been born and its intelligence had matured. The other was a heavenly puppet that had personally enlightened it so that it had intelligence that was not inferior to that of a human. One could imagine the excitement in his heart. The two immediately began to communicate. The heavenly puppet that had just been born with intelligence had almost a blank consciousness. It knew very little and needed someone to guide it. As Chu Tsongfeng's master, Chu Mu would naturally guide him. It was equivalent to laying a foundation of knowledge for him. In addition, Chu Mu was also very curious about how the heavenly puppet cultivated. It turned out that after the heavenly puppet was born with intelligence, it would gradually derive the most suitable cultivation method for them as their intelligence matured. For example, Chu Tsongfeng used a flexible sword, and the key to using a flexible sword was different from that of a normal sword. It was more flexible, more versatile, and more unpredictable. Thus, the cultivation techniques that he developed in the future would focus on flexibility, versatility, and strangeness. There was another factor that would affect the derivation of cultivation methods, and that was energy. The attribute of the energy crystal embedded in the heavenly puppet would more or less have that attribute. For example, the current Chu Tsongfeng was embedded with a pure yang crystal. Therefore, the cultivation method derived from it would not only have flexibility, but also the grandeur of pure yang energy. Master, in fact, pure yang energy is not suitable for us. Chu Tsongfeng said, the power that is suitable for me should be a power that can cooperate with my sword. For example, Chu Mu asked. I am not sure, Master. Chu Tsongfeng's tone seemed to be a little distressed. It was becoming more and more human. Chu Tsongfeng did not know, but as his master, Chu Mu naturally had to consider it. The heavenly puppets were very precious. The complete version of the heavenly puppet was even more immeasurable. It could cultivate on its own and had unlimited potential. In the future, it would not be difficult for it to become a peerless master. Chumu naturally valued it and could not be careless. Songfing, if I remove the pure yang crystal from your body, will it have a bad effect on you? Chumu asked. Master, after removing the pure yang crystal, I will not be able to move for the time being. There will be no other effect. Chu Songfing said, however, Master, you have to find a suitable energy as soon as possible so that we can improve better. I will do it as soon as possible. Chumu said. He felt that his shoulders seemed to have become heavier. He quickly took off the pure yang crystal embedded in the 3 heavenly puppets. He did not want the cultivation method derived from them to have the characteristics of pure yang energy while their intelligence was growing. Not everyone was suitable to master the power of pure yang. It may not increase their strength, but in turn, it may weaken their strength. After removing the pure yang crystal, the heavenly puppets' eyes were still shining, but they could not move because of the lack of energy to support them. However, Chu Songfing could still communicate with Chumu. Soft sword. Chumu closed his eyes and thought. Different swords had different ways of using them. Even if one practiced the same basic sword technique, it would lead to obvious differences in their swords. For a long time, Chumu had been cultivating the long sword, and he was most proficient in it. However, when his attainments in swordsmanship reached his current level, it could be said that he had reached the level where one sword could understand 10,000 swords. Therefore, in his mind, in the spiritual world, Chumu made a simulation. He used the power of his soul to construct his own figure. He reached out, and the power of his soul condensed into a soft sword, and he began to cultivate. The soft sword technique focused on the 3 main keys of wiping, cutting, and entangling. However, those were only the most basic keys. In addition, the soft sword could be straightened in an instant and thrust out like a long sword. It also had amazing power. The moment the soft sword was straightened, it would produce a strong elastic force. It was so strong that it could shatter mountains. Therefore, the key to the soft sword could be defined as wiping, cutting, entangling, piercing, and entangling. At the same time, the soft sword was flexible and strange. It could also have the ability to confuse the enemy. After analysis, the soft sword had many advantages. However, Chumu finally defined it as 2 types. Since it was a sword, it must be able to kill the enemy. Therefore, it must have a sharp edge. For example, the power of the spirit sword could make the soft sword more powerful. The other type was strange and flexible. Its lethality was slightly lacking, but it could confuse the enemy. It was better to entangle the enemy so that the enemy could not escape and was difficult to resist. In the end, they would be killed. The first type focused on power. The second type focused on changes. If it's the first type, it should be a crystal with a sharp edge. If it's the second type, it should be an illusory crystal. Of course, it would be better to have both types at the same time. However, it was very difficult, and they might even weaken each other. After thinking it through, Chumu planned to choose one of the 2 types. As for which type, it would depend on which type of energy crystal he obtained first. After all, both types were not weak and had their strengths. Chapter 1570. Chumu asked the True Sword Sect's Wind Trust Hall to release a message. The sect master of the True Sword sect was interested in purchasing the light crystals, darkness crystals, illusory crystals, and sharpness crystals. Those who were interested could come to the True Sword sect. As a rapidly developing quasi-second-rate sect, the True Sword sect received a lot of attention in the Azure Water Dynasty. Therefore, the moment the news came out, it quickly spread throughout the Azure Water Dynasty, and even spread outside the dynasty. As for Chumu himself, he immediately made other arrangements after sending someone to spread the news. Yun Feng and Yun He, the 2 elders of the True Sword sect, were now demoted to deacons. However, they were loyal to the True Sword sect. When the True Sword sect was weak, they had put in a lot of effort for the development of the True Sword sect. They were people who had contributed greatly to the True Sword sect. Chu Mu gave each of them a profound Yang sword token, allowing them to freely enter and exit the profound Yang sword world. With good luck, the two of them successfully broke through to the early stage of the 8th heavenly layer. Chu Mu allowed them to enter the spirit pool to cultivate. They would first raise their cultivation to the peak of the 8th heavenly layer, then enter the profound Yang sword world to cultivate and consolidate their cultivation, preparing to break through to the eternal realm. In the profound Yang sword hall of the profound Yang sword world, the two of them were so excited that their bodies were trembling nonstop. They were incomparably loyal to the True Sword sect and were willing to pour their blood and sweat on the land of the True Sword sect. Ever since Chu Mu became the sect master of the True Sword sect, the True Sword sect began to break away from its previous predicament and rapidly developed. This made them feel happy and excited at the same time. But at the same time, they felt depressed and powerless because their cultivation was too low and their strength was too weak. In front of the rapidly developing True Sword sect, their strength began to seem insignificant. They could no longer contribute to the development of the True Sword sect like before. This feeling was very uncomfortable. They understood their own talent. The peak of the 7th heavenly layer was almost the limit. Breaking through to the 8th heavenly layer was completely due to luck. But now, Chu Mu had allowed them to cultivate in the spiritual pool. In a short time, their cultivation could rise to the peak of the 8th heavenly layer. After that, they could enter the profound Yang sword world to consolidate their breakthrough to the eternal realm. The rich and pure Yang Qi of the profound Yang sword palace intoxicated them deeply. When they recalled what Chu Mu had told them, their hearts trembled. "The two of you can break through without worry," the second elder said to Yun Feng and Yun He. There was a certain amount of danger in breaking through to the eternal realm, but with the protection of an expert, the danger could be reduced. Furthermore, the pure Yang Qi in the profound Yang sword hall was pure and rich. Without the interference of baleful aura, it was even safer. "I really envy the two of you," Si Zhang, who was prepared to protect them, said. This was because if Yun Feng and Yun He succeeded in breaking through to the eternal realm, their saint bodies would be pure Yang saint bodies, which were much stronger than ordinary saint bodies. They would also be able to stimulate the power of pure Yang, making them even stronger. Unlike them, their saint bodies had already been confirmed long ago. Fortunately, they could cultivate in the profound Yang sword palace frequently, and one day they would be able to obtain a pure Yang saint body. In addition to Yun Feng and Yun He, Chu Mu had originally planned to give the 10 esoteric disciples the profound Yang sword token to obtain the qualifications to cultivate in the profound Yang sword hall. The 10 esoteric disciples were the most outstanding disciples, selected by Chu Mu and the True Sword sect. There were only 10 spots, and they were regarded as the seeds of the True Sword sect. High hopes were placed on them, and they deserved better treatment. However, the current profound Yang sword world was still a secret of the True Sword sect. It was still a secret that couldn't be known by the outside world. Among the 10 esoteric disciples, there were a few who had some background, such as the prince of the Kanglan dynasty. If they knew about the existence of the profound Yang sword world, it was hard to guarantee that the forces behind them wouldn't know about it. For the time being, the True Sword sect didn't possess enough strength to guard the profound Yang sword world. Therefore, they could only temporarily prevent the 10 esoteric disciples from knowing about the existence of the profound Yang sword world. However, Chu Mu had made other compensations, and that was the pure Yang stone. Every esoteric disciple had received 100 pure Yang stones as a reward. The energy contained within each pure Yang stone was comparable to the energy of a 1-star peak saint expert. 100 pure Yang stones were equivalent to 100 1-star peak saint experts. As for the 10 esoteric disciples, The highest cultivation was only at the early stage of the ninth, heavenly layer of the Nirvana realm. There was still a huge gap between them and the immemorial realm. After receiving the reward of 100 pure yang stones, every esoteric disciple was extremely excited. It could be used to temper one's blood and qi, strengthen one's physique. It could also be used to temper one's sword origin and nourish one's primordial spirit. In short, the pure yang energy contained within the pure yang stones had many benefits. Its value was immeasurable. Chu Mu went into seclusion again. Before he went into seclusion, he gave Gu Wankong and the other two a profound yang sword token each. They could freely enter and exit the profound yang sword world. The development of the true sword sect was on the right track, and there was no need for him to keep an eye on it. Within the boundary monument hall of the profound yang sword palace, Chu Mu began to stop cultivating for nearly a year. The early stage of the first heavenly layer of the immemorial realm was only the starting point of the immemorial realm. It was the lowest level of existence. Of course, Chu Mu's true strength was far beyond that. It was shocking, but it was still not enough. It was very difficult to raise one's cultivation. The higher one's cultivation was, the more time it would take to raise one's cultivation level. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 10 years to raise one's cultivation level from the early stage of the first heavenly layer of the immemorial realm to the middle stage of the immemorial realm. In a good cultivation environment, if one's cultivation talent was outstanding, the time would be shortened. However, it would take at least 2 to 3 years. During cultivation, Chu Mu continuously absorbed and refined the pure yang qi. A portion of it nourished his primordial spirit, a portion nourished his saint body, and a portion nourished his sword origin. After a few hours, Chu Mu didn't feel any improvement. This was normal. Next, it was time to practice the sword. Basic sword techniques were indispensable. Even when he was studying the puppet Dao, Chu Mu would take some time to practice the basic sword techniques a few times every day. It didn't take much time. He comprehended the sword universe, the cloud-piercing sword style, the Dao beheading sword style, and the other top sword styles. Right now, I don't lack offensive sword styles. Chu Mu pondered while comprehending. The 3 sword styles of the stab formula plus the self-created cloud-piercing sword style. The 4 sword styles of the sever formula plus the self-created Dao beheading sword style. He had a total of 9 offensive sword styles. However, these 9 sword styles were all close-range attacks. Defensive sword styles or long-range offensive sword styles. Chu Mu pondered. Among the 30 top sword styles he had comprehended, some were theories. They were similar to the sword truth that he had created. There were only 20 sword styles that could be considered true sword styles. Among them, there were 3 sword styles of the stab formula, 4 sword styles of the sever formula, and 13 sword styles that Chu Mu hadn't comprehended yet. Among these 13 sword styles, 3 were long-range offensive sword styles, 2 were defensive sword styles, and 1 was a defensive counterattack sword style. There were a total of 6 sword styles. Chu Mu had to make a choice from these 6 sword styles. For a long time, Chu Mu had been focusing on offense. Even when facing the enemy's attack, he either met force with force or dodged. He also blocked, but it was just an ordinary block. Sometimes it wasn't so easy. After thinking about it, Chu Mu finally made a choice. A defensive sword style. Now that he didn't lack offensive sword styles, a defensive sword style might be able to play a miraculous role in battle. Of the 2 defensive sword styles, one was known as the immovable Wisdom King sword style. When executed, it was as if one had grown countless arms and countless sharp swords. No matter which angle the attack came from, it would be intercepted without any blind spots. The other defensive sword style was called the Thousand Weeping Willow sword style. Different from the Akalanithus sword style's absolute interception, the Thousand Weeping Willow sword style focused on weakening the enemy's attack. Once used, countless sword light would circle around the body like weeping willows. It could continuously weaken the enemy's attack until it disintegrated into nothingness. These two defensive sword styles each had their own unique points. They were both extraordinary. If used, it would definitely cause many experts to fight for it. Of the two defensive sword styles, Chumu chose the Akalanatha sword style first. Since he had made a choice, the next step was to comprehend the essence of the sword style and cultivate it. The ancient sword Dao had the true meaning of sword stab, true meaning of sword slash, true meaning of sword defense, and so on. The defense in the true meaning of sword defense meant defense. The sword was a lethal weapon. It could be used for both offense and defense. It all depended on how it was used. Chu Mu cultivated the Akalanatha sword style and planned to comprehend the true meaning of sword defense. In this way, the power of the defensive sword style would increase greatly. It would also be of great help to the defensive sword style that he would create in the future. After comprehending, he began cultivating with the eternal spirit, sword in hand. He raised his hand and struck out. In an instant, countless illusions appeared on Chu Mu's arm. Following that, countless illusions appeared on the sword in his hand. They circled around him. It looked like Chu Mu's body had grown many arms. Each arm held a sword, giving people the feeling that they would not know where to start. Apart from cultivating the Akalanatha sword style, Chu Mu also planned to take some time to cultivate the third ring of the rainbow ring, the yellow ring. The rainbow ring was a primordial spirit defensive mystic technique. It was suitable for a level 7 primordial spirit to cultivate. Currently, Chu Mu's primordial spirit was at the peak of level 2. However, due to certain reasons, his peak level 2 primordial spirit was comparable to some weaker level 3 primordial spirits. Now, with the 30% boost from the black gold mask, it was completely comparable to an ordinary level 3 primordial spirit. Cultivating the yellow ring was no longer a difficult task. Every day, Chu Mu stayed in the Boundary Steel Hall to cultivate Sword Origin, Sword Universe, Basic Sword Techniques, Cloud Piercing Sword Style, Dao Cutter Sword Style. The focus was on the Akalanatha sword style. After cultivating the Akalanatha sword style to a proficient level, Chu Mu began to take some time to cultivate the yellow ring of the rainbow ring. In the spiritual world, the hands of the primordial spirit moved and mobilized the power of the primordial spirit to condense primordial spirit talismans. These primordial spirit talismans were yellow in color. Once they were condensed, they automatically flew out and stopped between the orange ring and the primordial spirit floating in the void. The second primordial spirit talisman and the third were constantly condensing. Chapter 1571. In the spiritual world, the primordial spirit sat in the center. At the outermost periphery, there was a red ring with the primordial spirit as the center. Inside the red ring, there was an orange ring that surrounded the primordial spirit. Inside the orange ring, there was a yellow ring that surrounded the primordial spirit. Chu Mu had already mastered the first to third rings of the rainbow ring. The third ring had a strong defensive power. Coupled with Chu Mu's extraordinary primordial spirit and the enhancement of the black gold mask, he could even withstand a level 3 primordial spirit attack, mystic technique, cast by a level 4 primordial spirit. The cultivation of the yellow ring was even more time-consuming than the red ring and orange ring. It took Chu Mu a full 3 days to complete. The fourth ring was a green ring, suitable for a level 4 primordial spirit to cultivate. Chu Mu tried it and realized that condensing a green ring talisman consumed more than half of his primordial spirit's power. Even after exhausting all of his primordial spirit's power, he could barely condense 2 green ring talismans. As for the cultivation of each ring of the rainbow ring, it had to be done in one go. If there was a break in the middle, the condensed primordial spirit talisman would automatically dissipate, which was equivalent to a waste of effort. Under such circumstances, Chu Mu could only give up on cultivating the green ring. He could only wait until his primordial spirit broke through the second level to the third level before trying again. The Boundary Monument Hall was the center of the entire profound Yang sword realm. Its pure Yang energy was incomparably dense and pure, surpassing any other hall in the profound Yang sword palace. Even if Chu Mu did not cultivate a cultivation technique, he would still be passively nourished and tempered. If he took the initiative to absorb it for cultivation, the efficiency would increase by more than 100 times. Everyone was cultivating diligently. Inside the Boundary Monument Hall, Chu Mu held 2 swords in his hands. One was the Eternal Spirit Sword and the other was the Heavenly Holy Sword. As he waved his arms, the 2 swords seemed to be an extension of his arms, connected by blood. As he waved his arms, countless arms and swords seemed to appear around Chu Mu's body. He was like an immovable wisdom king. Immediately after, all the arms and swords disappeared, turning into threads of sword light that fell from the sky like a glowing weeping willow. As the threads of sword light flowed, they were like a water curtain. This move was the other defensive sword move, Thousand Threads Willow Sword move. After a period of cultivation, Chu Mu had already mastered the 2 defensive sword moves. He was very proficient in them. The only thing he lacked was to comprehend the essence of them. These 2 defensive sword moves had one advantage, and that was that they could be used with a single sword or they could be used with 2 swords. In the case of using 2 swords, it would be easier. Chu Mu's perception was very high, but now he encountered a bottleneck. Countless silk-like sword light disappeared. Chu Mu lowered his arms and started thinking. The best way to cultivate the defensive sword style should be in actual combat, defending against attacks. Thinking of this, Chu Mu immediately got to work. He took out the materials, and in the short span of a day, he created 18 one-star saint level puppets and activated them. The 18 one-star saint level puppets were arranged into a level 1 puppet array by Chu Mu, and Chu Mu was in the middle of the array. Chu Mu controlled his strength to be at the beginning of the 3-star saint level, and the 18 puppets in the level 1 puppet array could all attack at the level of the 3-star saint level. The 18 one-star saint level puppets and 18 swords continuously attacked Chu Mu. The power of each sword was at the level of the 3-star saint level. Chu Mu did not dodge or counterattack, but directly used the Akalanatha sword move to block and defend. The Akalanatha sword move and Thousand Threads Willow sword move were used alternately. When the Akalanatha sword move was used, it was as if it was rooted to the ground, standing firm and blocking the attacks head-on. This sword move required the user to have a strong physique. Otherwise, it would be difficult to withstand the recoil. The Akalanatha sword move naturally had its mysteries. It was different from an ordinary head-on collision. The moment the move was used, one's strength would be strengthened by 10 times or more. Only then would one be able to withstand the enemy's attack head-on. The Thousand Threads Willow sword move was different. Its main defensive method was to weaken the attack. Countless thread-like sword lights fell down. Every attack that entered Chu Mu's body became faint and weak before disappearing. They were unable to cause any damage to Chu Mu. Congratulations to the 2 of you. From now on, you are the new elders of the True Sword Sect. Chu Mu said to the 2, standing in front of him. If it weren't for the sect master, we wouldn't be here today. Yun Feng and Yun He's faces were filled with excitement as they spoke to Chu Mu. From the looks of it, they seemed to be younger, and their auras were stronger. They were fundamentally different from before. Yun Feng and Yun He had successfully passed the Aeon Tribulation in the profound Yang Sword Palace and become sage realm experts of the Eternal Realm. From then on, their lives were different from before. Although the 2 of them only had ordinary talent, and if they worked hard, the probability of passing the Aeon Tribulation was less than 1%. However, because of Chu Mu, their fates were changed. Breaking through to the Eternal Realm with cultivation at the peak of the 8th sky of Nirvana Realm was definitely better than breaking through to the peak of the 7th sky of Nirvana Realm. Moreover, They had passed the Aeon tribulation in the profound Yang Sword Palace, and the energy they had absorbed when refining their bodies was pure Yang Qi. It was condensed into pure Yang saint bodies. Unlike Gul Wankong and the others, Yun Feng and Yun, he had obtained sufficient pure Yang Qi. Therefore, their pure Yang saint bodies were complete. Of course, they were only at the lowest level of pure Yang saint bodies, but they were much stronger than ordinary saint bodies. They could even use pure Yang Qi to fight. After being refined by pure Yang Qi, their primordial spirits had reached the intermediate level 1 primordial spirits, which was better than most people's beginner level 1 primordial spirits. Their comprehension had increased, and they had mastered the essence of sword skills. They had also grasped the first level sword force and became a true sword saint. Although Chu Mu was in seclusion, it wasn't to the point of death. He would come out every once in a while. After breaking through, Yun Feng and Yun, he took charge of the Wind Trust Hall and Punishment Hall again. The Wind Trust Hall was in charge of collecting information. Chu Mu had instructed them to collect the deep blue sacred pearls, but they hadn't found anything. After being happy for a while, they got down to business. Sect leader, a new sect has appeared recently. It is called the Battle King sect. Its origin is mysterious, but it is developing rapidly. It specializes in targeting third-rate and quasi-second-rate forces. Yun Feng reported, until now within the Kanglin dynasty, 30 third-rate forces and 10 quasi-second-rate forces have been subdued. Among them, 7 third-rate forces and 3 quasi-second-rate forces were not willing to submit. They were all destroyed. Battle King sect. Chu Mu was slightly shocked. 30 third-rate forces had been subdued, 10 quasi-second-rate forces had been subdued, 7 third-rate forces, and 3 quasi-second-rate forces had been completely annihilated. The true sword sect's current strength was only equivalent to a quasi-second-rate force. It has been less than a month since the Battle King sect appeared. They are very arrogant and overbearing. They either submit or destroy the sect. Yun Feng said, moreover, they only target third-rate and quasi-second-rate forces. They won't provoke second-rate, quasi, or first-rate forces. According to the information we've obtained, when the Warlord sect sets their sights on a force, they'll send a Warlord's invitation, and the time of the visit will be written on it. They only target third-rate and quasi-second-rate forces. Chu Mu nodded. In other words, it is very likely that our True Sword sect will receive a Battle King invitation as well. Yes, said Yun Feng. All right. If they send a Battle King invitation over, let me know, said Chu Mu, giving Yun Feng a way to contact him. Chu Mu took the matter of the Battle King sect to heart slightly. However, he did not pay too much attention to it because he still had other things to do. Every day, there would be disciples going to the puppet cave, but even after a few months, no one had been able to break through the puppet cave. The puppets in the puppet cave had very strong bodies, and they had great strength and speed. They also had exquisite swordsmanship and knew how to coordinate with each other. Although no one had been able to pass through the puppet cave, all the disciples who did felt their combat strength increase. Their battle experience increased, and their grasp of sword skills deepened. The True Sword sect was growing at a slow but steady pace. Once someone reached the 7th firmament of the Aeon realm, the True Sword sect would immediately become a second-rate force. Currently, the True Sword sect did not have a 7th firmament expert, but it was not inferior to ordinary second-rate forces in any other aspect. As for Xia Jingkong, although he was a 7-star sword saint, he was only a guest elder of the True Sword sect. He could not be considered a member of the True Sword sect. Chu Mu entered the Boundary Steel Hall again to cultivate. Under the level 1 puppet formation, the 18 one-star saint puppets each had the power of a 3-star saint. They kept attacking from all directions. Chu Mu held his sword with one hand. When he swung it, it was as if there were arms all over his body. Countless sharp swords blocked all the attacks coming from all directions. When they collided head-on, huge shockwaves rippled out endlessly. If it was a normal block, Chu Mu would not be able to withstand it. However, with the motionless Wisdom King sword style, he could immediately dissolve the shock waves after each block. It would not affect the next block at all. Chu Mu seemed to be one with the boundary steel hull. He did not move at all. Soon after, the sword technique changed and became the 1,000 silk weeping willow sword style. Countless silk-like sword lights fell down, and Chu Mu, who was within them, swayed like a willow in the wind. He had already grasped the essence of the 1,000 silk weeping willow sword style. Using 2 swords to perform the motionless Wisdom King sword style and the 1,000 willow sword style was easier than using 1 sword. It also consumed less energy. However, using 2 swords was an extension of Chu Mu's strength. 1 sword was the foundation. Day after day of cultivation, Chu Mu came out of seclusion not long after. There was an unexpected surprise. One of the top 10 secret disciples, the Prince of the Kanglan Empire, gave Chu Mu dozens of illusory crystals. However, Chu Mu did not take them for free. Instead, he exchanged them with the same number of pure yang crystals. After receiving the illusory crystals, Chu Mu embedded the 18 illusory crystals in Chu Tsongfeng's body. Chu Tsongfeng's intelligence had already reached the level of Deshang. With the support of suitable energy, he began to quickly derive a suitable cultivation method for him. Chapter 1572. Cultivation knew no time. Spring passed, summer passed, autumn came, and winter arrived at the end of autumn. The lush greenery that covered the mountains had already withered. Only the tenacious trees were still standing, no matter how the wind and rain battered them. A figure was strolling in the mountains as if he was taking a leisurely stroll in the backyard. He was leisurely and carefree, like the rolling clouds. The wind that blew past was ice-cold like a blade. It scraped against the face, causing a slight, stinging sensation. The strolling figure suddenly stopped. He raised his head and saw white snowflakes drifting down from the gloomy sky. They filled the sky and covered the earth, boundless and endless. They were like fairies that descended from the sky, dancing between the heaven and earth. They fluttered under the biting cold winter wind. Chu Mu extended his hand. A white snowflake quietly fell into his palm. It was a white sparkling snowflake that was chilling to the bone. With a slight tremble of his hand, the sparkling snowflake dissipated between the heaven and earth. More snowflakes fell from the sky, illuminating the mountains and plains in white. The heaven and earth were filled with snowflakes. It was snowing. This was the first time Chu Mu had encountered snow since he came to the deep blue world. It was very rare. Standing on the mountain and looking at the falling snow, the heaven and earth seemed to be silent. Only the sound of the falling snowflakes could be heard. It became clear and gradually magnified in his ears, filling the entire world. Under the absolute silence, his origin spirit moved slightly. The power of the soul in his spiritual world was mobilized and spread out in a strange way. The power of the soul seemed to have turned into flowers, fusing with the snowflakes and spreading out. Starting from the surrounding snowflakes, the power of the soul spread further and further. It's snowing. When was the last time it snowed? It was about 50 years ago. Is this snow? It's my first time seeing it. It's quite nice. Not only was there snow falling in the true sword sect, there was also snow falling in other places of the Kanglan Empire. The large amount of white snow was like fairies dancing between heaven and earth. It was everywhere in the mountains, forests, plains, and swamps. The snowfall this time was much larger than before. Not only did it cover the entire Kanglan Empire, but it even covered most of the surrounding regions. It could be said that it was the first time in several thousand years that such a large snowfall had occurred. The temperature was getting lower and lower. Ordinary people had no choice but to wear thick cotton-padded jackets to keep out the cold. Cultivators with lower cultivation bases could not help but feel the cold invading their bodies. They had to be prepared to keep out the cold, otherwise they might be affected. As for the cultivators with higher cultivation, they were still dressed in long robes. They were not afraid of the cold and the heat. The coldness brought by the falling snow was not enough to threaten them. In many places, children wearing thick cotton-padded jackets like wrapped rice dumplings were building snowmen and having snowball fights. They were having a great time. Some cultivators who practiced special cultivation methods also took the opportunity to practice without restraint. Snow had the power of snow. Normally, it would be difficult to comprehend the power of snow when cultivating techniques related to snow because it had been many years since it last snowed. However, it was different now. With such heavy snow, it brought about a clear and direct feeling, making it easier to comprehend. Under such heavy snow, many cultivators who cultivated snow cultivation methods and comprehended the power of snow all made great progress and became even stronger. In the heavy snow, two people were facing each other on a mountain peak. They were the two core disciples of the true sword sect. Senior Brother Lin, the next move is a sword technique that I just comprehended. Please give me some pointers. The person on the left cupped his hands and said, Junior Brother is too polite. Come, said Senior Brother Lin on the right. Senior Brother Lin, this move of mine is called Sky Full of Snow. As soon as he finished speaking, he stabbed out with his sword. The sword pierced into the snow and seemed to be assimilated by the snow. It could not be seen or heard, only the sound of falling snow. Senior Brother Lin narrowed his eyes and stared straight ahead. In the falling snow, there seemed to be a sharp sword light flashing. In the end, it was only a newly developed sword technique. It was still rather crude. It seemed mysterious, but there were actually traces to be found. Under the sword light, snowflakes flew over. Each snowflake was like a sharp sword, bringing with it a terrifying sharpness that could cut through everything. Crude, barely half a move. Chu Mu, who had merged his consciousness with the snowflakes, saw this scene. Unending river, Senior Brother Lin roared. The moment he stabbed out, the sword light burst out. In an instant, Senior Brother Lin had stabbed out countless times. Each strike brought with it a resplendent sword light, converging into a long river of sword light that surged endlessly. Under Chu Mu's perception, all the mysteries of this move were clearly revealed. Unending River was a unique move that Senior Brother Lin had developed after studying the Long River sword technique that Chu Mu had created. He had combined the essence of the Long River sword technique with his own understanding and many battles. This move was much more complete and powerful than the flying snow that he had created himself. The falling snow was torn apart by the unending river sword light, turning into fragments of snow that rolled back, sending the opponent flying. At the same time, it also created a vacuum. After a moment of pause, more snow fell and filled the vacuum. A snowflake is a sword. How many snowflakes is a sword? A figure stood silently in the snow. His sword was sheathed, and his hand gripped the hilt. His eyes shone brightly. He was completely covered in snow, turning into a snowman. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. The melodious hum of a sword rang out in the silent world. It rippled outwards, and a ring of silver ripples seemed to spread outwards. Soon after, a sword stabbed out. The sword light dispersed, fusing into the falling snow and falling from the sky. Every snowflake possessed an astonishing sharpness, but the moment they landed, they dissipated into nothingness. This was because the snowflakes could not withstand the power of the sword. The power of the soul fused into the snowflakes, constantly spreading outwards. Very soon, it enveloped the entire true sword sect. It continued to spread outwards, moving further and further away from the true sword sect. Everything that happened under the cover of the power of the soul was sensed by Chu Mu. He could clearly see everything. The sudden snowfall gave Chu Mu a different kind of insight. If I can make my power be like the snowflakes, boundless and omnipresent, the thought only flashed through Chu Mu's mind. He knew that it was impossible. Perhaps only supreme experts, emperors, or even saint kings could achieve this. With a thought flashed through his head. Afterwards, Chumu unleashed his sword domain. The sword domain was unleashed at full force. With Chumu as the center, it covered a radius of 3,000 meters in the blink of an eye. The power of the sword domain was invisible. It could not be seen. It could only be felt. Under the sword domain, all the falling snow suddenly froze. Space seemed to freeze, and everything came to a standstill. Within a radius of 3,000 meters, there were countless falling snowflakes. They were suspended in midair as if they had been frozen. The scene looked very unique. "Disperse!" Chumu called out. Within the sword domain, he was the ruler. With that, the frozen snowflakes in the air dispersed in the blink of an eye. They completely vanished, as if they had never appeared in the first place. An even stranger scene appeared. With Chumu as the center, a 3,000-meter radius was completely empty. Yet, beyond that, there were countless snowflakes floating down. Soon after, Chumu's mind moved, and the snow falling from the sky once again fell into the sword domain and froze. Chumu analyzed the falling snow. His power of the soul fused into every single snowflake, comprehending its mysteries. The snow did not seem to possess any power, but it still possessed its mysteries. Chumu's burst of inspiration made him try again. He wanted to see if he could guide sword intent and sword force into the falling snow and fuse it with the sword domain to strengthen it. The most basic sword domain only had the ability to weaken the opponent's strength and speed and increase his own strength and speed. Even if he cultivated it to the limit, it would not change. It would only weaken stronger enemies. However, the developed sword domain was different from the most basic sword domain. Now, Chumu was walking down the path of comprehending the sword domain to a higher level. The falling snow and the power in the sky transformed the power of the falling snow into a type of power within the sword domain, assisting the sword domain in attacking enemies within. He tried again and again, failing again and again. After failing, he summed up his shortcomings and continued to try, improving bit by bit. The eternal sword intent fused into the snowflakes. The eternal force made the snowflakes seem to have solidified, preventing them from melting. The sword intent increased the power of the snowflakes, making them as sharp as swords. Combined with sword origin and sword force, each snowflake seemed to have become a sword that had been tempered thousands of times. They possessed terrifying power. With Chumu's current ability, he could only create 100 snowflakes. Fall! With a low shout, as if it was the command of a ruler, the 100 snowflakes that contained astonishing sharpness and power seemed to have transformed into divine swords that fell from the sky. They stabbed towards Chumu as if they could slay gods and demons. Chumu wielded both swords. He directly used the sword style of the Akala. The moment he used the sword style, Chumu felt as if his feet had formed a close connection with the earth. Many arms grew out of his body. Each arm held a sword. As they swung, they defended against the 100 falling swords. These 100 swords were the product of the combination of Chumu's sword intent, sword origin, and sword force within the sword domain. They possessed great power. Every time he defended against them, he could feel a huge impact. When Chumu defended against all the 100 snowflake swords, small nicks appeared on one of the swords in his hands. This was an ordinary heavenly saint sword. It couldn't be compared to the eternal spirit sword, but it was still very hard and resilient. Under the snowflake swords, there were nicks on it. It was enough to show that the snowflake sword sharpness was very astonishing. Not bad power. I'll use it as the first form of the sword domain, Chumu thought. Chapter 1573. White, translucent snowflakes the size of goose feathers fell from the sky. They were densely packed, covering the entire sky. It covered the sky, covered the earth, covered the mountains and rivers, traversed through space and time and descended. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, in the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed since the snow had descended. Not only did the falling snow not weaken due to the passage of time, it became even more intense instead. Between the heavens and the earth, it was a vast expanse of pure white. At a glance, it caused one to be unable to distinguish between the mountains, rivers, swamps, earth, and plains. There was only one kind of color, only one kind of sight. The true sword sect was not spared either. It was covered in white snow, but it did not melt. More than 3 meters of snow had accumulated. Perhaps snow was a very pleasing sight, especially to cultivators. The snow would not make them feel cold, and to a certain extent, it would even be beneficial to their cultivation. However, it was still very unbelievable that more than 3 meters of snow had accumulated. It felt like the ground had been increased by more than 3 meters. Everyone seemed to have become masters of movement techniques, leaving no traces behind as they stepped on the snow. The heavy snow had allowed the strength of many cultivators to clearly increase. Cultivators who cultivated in snow or ice cultivation methods, as well as those who comprehended the force of snow or force of ice, all benefited greatly from the snow. As for those who did not cultivate in any cultivation methods related to snow or ice, they also made significant breakthroughs in their resistance against the cold in a harsh environment due to the descent of the snow. The snow had created a group of cultivators, but it had harmed ordinary people. In a world, ordinary people were still the majority. Without ordinary people, where would there be cultivators? It could be said that almost all cultivators started off as ordinary people and walked toward strength step by step. Ordinary people did not have the tough physiques of cultivators, nor did they have the powerful vitality of cultivators. They did not have the great strength of cultivators, so they could only rely on stoves and cotton-padded jackets to resist the cold. They might have been able to do so in the beginning, but as time passed and the snow continued to fall, the coldness continued to accumulate. It became colder and colder. Some people had already frozen to death. It was foreseeable that the royal family of the Kanglan Empire had already reacted. They sent out troops to provide disaster relief and ensure the safety of the citizens. At the very least, they could let the citizens survive this heavy snow. At the same time, on the 3rd day of the snowfall, Dynasty also informed all the sects and families to cooperate. The territory of the True Sword sect had already been given to the True Sword sect by the imperial family of the Kanglan Empire. It was under the jurisdiction of the True Sword sect. The ordinary people within its territory were all citizens of the True Sword sect, so their safety was naturally the responsibility of the True Sword sect. Therefore, on the 2nd day of the snowfall, Chu-Mu asked the disciples in charge of alchemy in the sect to refine the Fire Sun pill. This was a very low-level pill that was not very useful for cultivators, but it was suitable for ordinary people to consume. Consuming 1 pill would allow an ordinary person to resist the cold for 3 days. The Fire Sun pill was very low-level, so the spiritual herbs needed to refine it were very ordinary as well. As a result, in just a single day, all the disciples began to refine cauldron after cauldron of pills. Even the elders took action, refining 100,000 Fire Sun pills. There were far more than 100,000 ordinary people in the True Sword sect's territory, perhaps even 1 million. A mere 100,000 Fire Sun pills were naturally nowhere near enough. As a result, they continued to refine the pills after taking them out, working through the night. The disciples set off, bringing along groups of Fire Sun pills, winter clothing, and food. They distributed them to every household in the True Sword sect to ensure that they could survive this heavy snow. As there were not enough Fire Sun pills right now, they dissolved each pill in water and shared a bowl of water with a few people. Although the medicinal effects were greatly reduced, it was still enough to keep people warm for a day with winter clothing. At the same time, the disciples of the True Sword sect gathered the stronger ordinary people to shovel the snow and prevent the snow from crushing the houses. For the sake of survival and their families, These people naturally worked extremely hard. With the true sword sect's prompt response, no ordinary people died. Even those who were sick were treated in time. On the 10th day, the heavy snow finally turned into light snow. The ground was covered in white, and the heavens and earth blended together. The true sword sect's actions had united the hearts of the people in the true sword sect's territory to the greatest extent. The effects of this could not be seen overnight, but would last for generations to come. On the 12th day, the snow finally stopped. The last snowflakes fell. Within the 3,000-meter sword domain, the eternal sword intent, divine wilderness sword essence, and sword energy caused the 300 snowflakes to tremble, as if they had been forged from metal. The edges of the snowflakes emitted a cold and sharp luster as they streaked across the air in mysterious trajectories. Compared to the first day, the snowflakes had increased from 100 to 300. The trajectories of the snowflakes had changed from rough and straight to mysterious trajectories, and they were even more powerful. Without an opponent, Chumu used himself as the opponent. Within the sword domain, he controlled the 300 snowflakes to attack himself, and then used the Akalanatha sword style or the Thousand Willow sword style to defend himself. Both his offensive and defensive methods had been improved. Chumu had already comprehended the essence of the Akalanatha sword style and the Thousand Willow sword style, and he was gradually deepening it. What he regretted was that the first form of the sword domain consumed too much energy. He had to use the power of his soul to guide the sword intent, sword essence, and sword energy into the snowflakes. The lack of direct contact was a problem in itself. After succeeding, he had to consider the additional consumption of energy. If he strengthened his control, it would further increase the consumption of the power of his soul. After infusing the snowflakes, he still had to use the power of his soul to guide the 3 types of energy and fuse them together to unleash the power they should possess. As a result, with the current level of Chumu's soul and the power of his soul, as well as his other powers, he could only support 2 snowflakes like this. However, if his soul broke through from the peak of the 2nd level to the 3rd level, the number of snowflakes he could use would increase to 4 at the very least. The last snowflake fell. The gloomy sky was still, as if it had yet to return to its sunny state. Right now, it was covered in white snow as far as the eye could see. The mountains and earth had merged into one, and it was difficult to tell them apart. If it wasn't for the falling snow, Chumu's gaze was distant as an attempt from a few days ago flashed through his mind. The first form of the sword domain was considered an offensive form. It was even more powerful than an ordinary sword domain. Chumu had comprehended the first form of the sword domain from the falling snow. However, snowfall in the deep blue world was very rare. Sometimes it would only happen once every few decades, or at least once every few years. Even if it happened once every few months, it would not last for too long. Could it be that without the falling snow, Chumu's first form of the sword domain would be useless? No, that was not the case. The first form of the sword domain that he comprehended from the falling snow was essentially a medium. Falling snow was a type of medium. It was the medium used to fuse sword intent, sword origin, and sword energy together to unleash its power. Chumu's experiment a few days ago was to forcefully fuse sword intent, sword origin, and sword energy together without a medium using his powerful soul power. The final result was that he barely managed to condense 100 snowflake blades. Every snowflake blade appeared rather rough and unstable. Furthermore, the attacks they launched were only rough and straight lines. The power was evidently very limited. In addition, Chumu's soul was completely drained in just one attempt. He felt a little dizzy. Medium. Standing on the peak of the snowy mountain, Chumu began to ponder. Not everything could be used as a medium. This required particular attention, using the power of the soul to control the medium. If the medium was too heavy, it would increase the consumption of the power of the soul. If the medium was too light, it would be difficult to unleash its full power. One also had to consider the hardness and toughness of the medium. Snowflakes were actually not a very good medium. Although the snowflake's weight was suitable, they did not possess much hardness and toughness. The power they could unleash was extremely limited. However, the shape of snowflakes was very suitable. After pondering, Chu Mu decided to cast a batch of metal snowflakes based on the shape of snowflakes. As a medium, it would come in handy when he displayed the first form of the sword realm. After making this decision, Chu Mu's figure flashed and disappeared from the peak. In another flash, he appeared in the sect leader's hall. Immediately, Chu Mu's eyes narrowed. A cold light shot out and landed on the sect leader's seat. There was a golden rectangle erected there. He reached out and grabbed it. The golden rectangle automatically flew up at a strange speed. It was extremely fast, and its edges were incomparably sharp. It spun and sliced, tearing the sky apart. It attacked Chu Mu as if it was being controlled by an invisible person. This attack was extremely fast. The power it carried was extremely sharp, causing Chu Mu's pupils to contract in an instant. Chu Mu extended his sword finger and pointed forward. The space seemed to ripple. The golden rectangle suddenly stopped. Its power was directly destroyed by Chu Mu's sword finger. Chu Mu clenched his hands and immediately caught it. The remaining power caused Chu Mu's fingers to tremble. This power was shockingly at the level of a 5-star saint. If Chu Mu had only advanced by 1 star, he would have died without a doubt. The golden rectangle that was bigger than a palm was actually a post. On the front of the post, there was a slightly protruding word. Battle. When he saw that word, he immediately felt an intense battle intent rush towards him. It attacked Chu Mu's mind, but he was unable to move it at all because it was not strong enough. The Battle King sect. They've finally come, muttered Chu Mu as he opened the post. Order the True Sword sect to prepare within 3 days. After 3 days, the Battle King sect's envoy will come to receive them. The True Sword sect will become one of the Battle King sect's branches. The content was short and direct. At the end of the post were the 3 words Battle King sect. What big words! 3 days. Then let's see what kind of strength the Battle King sect has to say such arrogant words, muttered Chu Mu as he gathered the True Sword sect's elders. Chapter 1574. In a dazzling and luxurious palace, a burly man sat at the head of the table. His eyes shone brightly and his aura was oppressive. He wore a pure golden robe that shone with golden light. Frost Ice sect, Volcano sect, True Sword sect. The muscular man in the golden robe spoke. His voice was deep like the roar of a tiger. This time we've sent out 10 invitations. 6 will be sent to third-rate sects, and 4 will be sent to quasi-second-rate sections. Prepare yourselves and go to these sects and clans to receive them. If anyone refuses to submit, understood. Below him stood a row of people who were also wearing golden robes. The golden robes of this group of people were not as bright and resplendent. There was a circle on the back of each robe, and within the circle there was a large silver word battle. After bowing, the group of people in golden robes left the palace. Only the muscular man in the golden robe remained. He raised his head and looked out of the palace. His gaze was domineering, as if he was looking down on the world. 3 days was actually a short time. It was over after a bit of cultivation. 3 days ago, Chu Mu showed the invitations sent by the Battle King sect to the elders. After reading it, the elders were furious. The Battle King sect's words were too arrogant. It was as if they didn't put the True Sword sect in their eyes at all. Another point was that the invitations were placed on the sect leader's seat in the sect leader's hall. The invitations were sent by the Battle King sect to show off their strength to the True Sword sect. They did this on purpose to make the True Sword sect think that they were unfathomable and had extraordinary means. In reality, this was a form of provocation. The elders didn't go into seclusion. On the 3rd day, they all gathered in the sect leader's hall to wait for the Battle King Sect's envoy. The 7 great elders that originally belonged to the True Sword sect, as well as the newly promoted elders Yun Fong and Yun He, made a total of 9. Aside from that, there were also the 4 saints that Chu Mu had enslaved. The first one was Yang Zhen, a sage with ordinary talent who had relied on luck to pass the Yonic tribulation. After a few years, his cultivation base was still at the early first sky of the Yonic realm. Over the past few years, Yang Zhen had wholeheartedly focused on cultivating his swordsmanship. He had started from the most basic swordsmanship of the True Sword sect and gradually improved. With the guidance of the True Sword sect's Sword Saint elders and his perception as a saint-level expert, he had comprehended the essence of swordsmanship and grasped level 1 sword force. A few years was a short period of time. Comprehending the essence of swordsmanship and grasping level 1 sword force seemed very fast, but one couldn't forget that Yang Zhen was a saint-level expert. Even a saint-level expert with ordinary talent wouldn't be lacking in perception due to their primordial spirit. Moreover, he had been cultivating in a sword cultivation sect like the True Sword sect for a few years. Due to the influence of the environment and the guidance of the Sword Saint elders, he could sometimes save several years of cultivation time with just one guidance. Although the effects of multiple guidance were not so obvious every time, it was still equivalent to saving him several decades of cultivation time. Finally, it was time to cultivate the True Sword sect swordsmanship. The swordsmanship that Chu Mu had created had to be improved from the lowest level. Step by step, he had to deepen his comprehension and grasp of the swordsmanship. Finally, he had to comprehend the essence of the swordsmanship and grasp level 1 sword force. Not a single one of these 3 steps could be missing. If an ordinary saint-level expert didn't have these conditions, they would need at least a few decades to comprehend the essence of the swordsmanship and grasp level 1 sword force. However, Yang Zhen's talent was very ordinary in the end. It would be very difficult for him to go further on the path of the sword. Perhaps he would only grasp level 3 sword force in his entire life. Other than Yang Zhen, there were the 5-star sword Saint Merlin, the 3-star sword Saint Wenfei and Long Yi. The 4 of them were Chu Mu servants and didn't hold the position of elder of the True Sword sect. Chu Mu planned to make other arrangements. However, the 4 of them were sword saints, so they were naturally part of the upper echelon of the True Sword sect. Furthermore, they were extremely loyal and had the right to sit in the sect hall with the other elders. They also enjoyed the cultivation of the profound Yang sword world. The 9 elders and Yang Zhen's group made up a total of 13 saint-level experts. Chu Mu hadn't arrived yet. At this moment, 2 golden figures charged toward the sect hall like streaks of light. They ignored everything and charged straight toward the sect hall. Their powerful auras weren't concealed at all. They were the first to arrive, alarming the disciples of the True Sword sect as well as the elders in the sect hall. Who is it? Who is so arrogant to be so unbridled in the sect? The disciples were shocked and began to discuss among themselves. Their gazes followed the golden streaks of light toward the sect hall. How dare you? The great elder was enraged. He instantly released the aura of a peak 6-star saint. Like an erupting volcano, the aura condensed and vaguely formed an invisible giant sword. It slashed toward the 2 streaks of light that were charging toward him. The collision of the auras caused an earth-shattering boom that sounded like countless thunderbolts. An incomparably violent aura spread out, shocking the disciples of the True Sword sect. The aura released by the golden streaks of light let everyone know that they were also 6-star saints. Furthermore, they were at the late stage of 6-star saints. With their cooperation, they were actually able to resist the great elder's aura. An astonishing battle intent gushed out from the golden streaks of light. The 2 auras merged into one and pierced forward like a heaven-shaking divine spear. The golden streaks of light followed closely behind the heaven-shaking divine spear. They directly charged into the sect hall and landed on the ground. Ha 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 ha! as expected of the great elder of the true sword sect. Your strength is indeed extraordinary. As soon as the golden figures landed, a man and a woman appeared. The man had a rough appearance and was laughing loudly. I don't think so. Your strength is only at the peak of 6-star saint level, yet you can't stop us. We are at the late stage of 6-star saint level. It can only be considered ordinary. The woman in the golden robe was tall and slender. Her black hair was coiled up. Her eyes were slightly long and narrow. Her cheekbones were slightly protruding and her lips were thin. At first glance, she gave off a sharp and unkind feeling. The words that she said reflected the feeling that she gave off. Whether it is ordinary or extraordinary, you will know once you try. The great elder said in a deep voice. His hair and beard fluttered without wind. His aura continued to rise. An astonishing sharpness surged from his body. It was as if it had turned into a sword, a world-shaking sword. It locked onto the man and woman in the golden robe. Immediately, their faces turned serious, and they were on full alert. "Wait, we are not here to fight," the man in the golden robe said. Facing the great elder's attack, he still had some strength left. It meant that although his cultivation was a small level lower than the great elder's, his strength was extraordinary. 3 days ago, you received the golden invitation of our sect. Now, offer up the treasure of our sect and become a branch of our sect, the woman in the golden robe said in a sharp voice. Otherwise, the consequences are not something you can bear. As soon as the woman in the golden robe said that, all the saints of the true sword sect were infuriated. They were all members of the true sword sect, the upper echelons of the true sword sect. They also had a strong sense of belonging to the true sword sect. They were bound together for good or ill. The woman in the golden robe and her attitude were incomparably arrogant. She didn't put the true sword sect in her eyes at all. Boom, boom, boom. Powerful chi burst out from the saints of the true sword sect and soared into the sky. The main hall of the true sword sect trembled in an instant. The 2 envoys of the Battle King's sect's expression changed abruptly. They gathered their strength and prepared to deal with the attack at any time. Then tell me, what kind of unbearable consequences are you talking about? Said a calm voice. That voice seemed to contain some kind of magical power. Instantly, the furious saints of the true sword sect retracted their chi. Greetings, sect master. All the saints turned around and bowed respectfully with their swords. In the empty seat of the sect head, a person had appeared and was currently seated on it. Early first, heavenly layer of the Aeon. Your Chu Mu, the sect master of the true sword sect. The man and woman in the golden robe turned and looked at Chu Mu. Sharp light shot out of their eyes, as if they wanted to see through Chu Mu's entire body. It's rumored that you once killed a 2-star saint with your nirvana cultivation base. Now that you're only a 1-star saint, you should be able to kill a 3-star saint. You can be considered a monstrous genius. Our sect has always welcomed monstrous geniuses. After the true sword sect becomes our branch, you have 2 choices, said the man in the golden robe. Said the man in the golden robe as if he was telling the truth. The first choice is to continue leading the true sword hall and become the leader of the true sword hall. The second choice is to join the Battle King sect and become a disciple. You will receive the best training and enjoy the best resources. With your talent, your future is limitless. Even the name has been changed. Chu Mu smiled faintly. True sword sect, true sword hall. This Battle King sect was really bold. It seems like you still don't understand how strong our sect is. The woman in the golden robe curled her lips. She said in a mocking tone, Our sect has an extraordinary background and is extremely powerful. It's your honor to be chosen as a branch of our sect. If you don't want to, the Lin family, Xianzhen sect, Blazing Sword sect, and other quasi-second-rate forces are examples of the true sword sect. Hall Master Chu, we're not trying to scare you. We really do have the strength. The man in the golden robe smiled and said loudly, to the Battle King sect, no matter if it's a third-rate force, quasi-second-rate force, or even a second-rate force, they're nothing. Even if it's a first-rate force, we don't fear them. As long as you join the Battle King sect, your future is limitless. I wonder which expert is the Battle King sect master. The opponent's big talk didn't make Chu Mu angry. Instead, he calmly asked a question. Wait until Hall Master Chu follows us to the Battle King sect. The man in the golden robe smiled and said, we all know that the True Sword sect has some connections with the True God Sword sect from thousands of years ago. I'm sure the True Sword sect wants to regain the glory of the True God Sword sect. As long as you join the Battle King sect, it won't be long. Go back and tell the Battle King sect master that the True Sword sect and the Battle King sect will mind our own business. Chu Mu replied. Chapter 1575. Outside the main hall of the True Sword sect, the disciples all gathered and looked in the direction of the sect master's peak. The two golden streams of light that did not conceal their auras made them realize that something was wrong. They vaguely felt that something was about to happen. The higher a cultivator's cultivation base was, the clearer their intuition towards danger was. Even though they didn't know what was going on, they felt a sense of dread in their hearts. In the main hall, the atmosphere was extremely tense, as if swords were about to be drawn at any moment. Sect leader Chu, I've studied your information. I've always felt that even though you're tough, you're a wise sect leader. The golden-robed man's eyebrows twitched as if they were about to rise. His expression became cold, and his tone became frosty as well. You're the master of a sect. Any decision you make will affect the prosperity or decline of a sect, as well as the survival or death of tens of thousands of disciples in a sect. Don't make a single wrong decision and cause the foundation of the True Sword sect to be destroyed overnight, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of disciples in the True Sword sect. The man in golden robes' voice became more and more severe, as if he was reprimanding his subordinates. Chu Mu frowned. The people of the Battle King sect were too self-righteous. They really thought that the True Sword sect was their branch, and the people of the True Sword sect were their subordinates. They could scold and order them around as they pleased. My True Sword sect is founded on the sword. We believe in the Tao of the sword. We believe in being like a sword. We can bend and break, but we don't fear power. If you want to behave atrociously, I'm afraid you've come to the wrong place. Chu Mu suddenly stood up and straightened his back. His body was as straight as a sword as he pointed towards the sky. His aura was imposing as he soared into the sky. His eyes were filled with a sharp glint and sword intent. He went straight for the two envoys of the Battle King sect. Elders, listen to my orders. Capture these two. Yes, the great elder and the others shouted in unison. They had long found the two men in golden robes unpleasant to the eye. A powerful chi burst out. In the main hall, sword light flickered, dazzling and resplendent. A shocking sword intent surged, as if countless swords were colliding. Sparks flew in the air. The expressions of the two envoys from the Battle King sect changed drastically. They immediately used all their strength to retreat and rush out of the main hall. Although the two of them were late-stage 6-star saints and believed they were no weaker than regular peak 6-star saints, there were a total of 13 saints in the main hall of the True Sword sect. One of them was a peak 6-star saint who had been immersed in the way of the sword for thousands of years. Compared to them, his strength could only be greater. Moreover, there was an early-stage 6-star saint rank sword saint, and the others were 5-star saint rank for star saint rank, 3-star saint rank, and so on and so forth. Just that peak 6-star saint rank sword saint was sufficient to fight the two of them. If the other sword saints were included, then they were utterly incapable of going against them head-on. Although they were arrogant, the people of the War King sect were not brainless. Before they came, they had already done their research on the True Sword sect. They knew almost everything about the true sword sect, so they were naturally on guard. In the blink of an eye, 2 streaks of golden light shot out of the sect's main hall. Immediately after, the true sword sect's saints chased after them. More than 10 rays of light flashed across the sky. Their powerful aura shook the surroundings. "Thieves, don't run!" shouted the great elder furiously. His years of cultivation did not diminish his vigor and vitality. He raised his sword and slashed down. A huge sword light rose up like a sun, bringing with it an incomparably shocking power as it attacked the 2 envoys of the War King sect. The terrifying sword intent brought about a terrifying pressure. The expressions of the 2 envoys from the Battle King sect changed drastically. No wonder he was a sword saint who had been immersed in sword cultivation for thousands of years. Although his talent was ordinary, his foundation was extremely solid. He had a shocking level of attainment in sword cultivation. The 2 envoys of the War King sect attacked, one after another. Their chi soared into the sky. A golden sword appeared in each of their hands. They looked extremely powerful and domineering. They raised their swords and slashed down. 2 huge golden sword lights shot out. Immediately after, the 2 of them reached out their hands. Golden light condensed in the center of their palms and shot out. It was extremely powerful. Its power was even more powerful than the golden sword light. The people of the War King sect cultivated the sword as well as other things. Most of them were not sword cultivators, but they were still extremely powerful. When they collided, an incomparably shocking energy wave spread out in all directions. Using the energy wave, the 2 envoys of the War King sect quickly retreated and escaped. "Don't chase anymore." Chu-Mu also flew over. He didn't explode with his full speed. He only maintained the level of a 3-star saint. Hearing Chu-Mu's words, the elders all stopped. The reason why he told the elders to stop chasing was because Chu-Mu had his own plans. The 2 envoys of the War King sect were 6-star late-stage saints. Their strength wouldn't be any weaker than an ordinary peak 6-star saint. It was extremely difficult to capture them because the Great Elder and the other's strength wouldn't be able to suppress them. Once a real battle broke out, it would definitely cause unnecessary damage to the true sword sect. It might even cause a large number of disciples to die. It wasn't difficult either. Chu-Mu only needed to equip the heavenly puppet. With the heavenly puppet strength, it could easily capture the 2 envoys of the War King sect. However, Chu-Mu didn't plan to do that. The 2 envoys of the War King sect wouldn't give up after leaving this time. Next time, it wouldn't just be the 2 of them. According to the information gathered by Elder Yun Feng, the War King sect wasn't an easy sect to deal with. Any sect that refused to submit to the War King sect, regardless of whether they were third-rate or quasi-second-rate, were all destroyed by the War King sect. This time, the True Sword sect had directly refused to submit to the Battle King sect. The Battle King sect definitely wouldn't let this go. Therefore, Chu-Mu had the 2 envoys of the Battle King sect leave alive to give them a false impression that the True Sword sect's strength was only so. Otherwise, if the 2 of them were left alive, the Battle King sect would raise the threat level of the True Sword sect and send even more experts. When the time came, the War King sect would send a large force to take revenge. Under the circumstances of underestimating the True Sword sect's strength, it would be like throwing meat buns at a dog. Either they didn't do it, or they would be more direct. In the blink of an eye, the 2 envoys of the War King sect rushed out of the True Sword sect's mountain gate. The formation of the True Sword sect hadn't been activated yet, so they could come and go as they pleased. People of the True Sword sect, listen up. Because of your sect leader's stupid decision, the True Sword sect has become the enemy of the War King sect. Soon, the True Sword sect will be destroyed. You better take advantage of the time before the experts of the War King sect arrive and leave the True Sword sect. Otherwise, Only death awaits you, shouted the golden-robed man. The sharp and unkind golden-robed woman didn't say anything. Instead, she used her long and narrow eyes to sweep across the mountain gate of the true sword sect and the disciples of the true sword sect. The disdain in her eyes was extremely clear, and those with poor temperament would immediately go crazy. A hint of ridicule hung on her harsh lips. This golden-robed woman used her expression to explain what it meant to attract hatred. If you want to fight, then fight. No need to talk nonsense. Chu Mu's voice resounded. All right, let's see if you can still be so stubborn when the time comes. The golden-robed man said angrily. The golden-robed woman's fierce gaze was as sharp as a knife. She glanced at Chu Mu's face as if she wanted to dig out a piece of his flesh. Then the two of them turned around and turned into two rays of golden light, quickly leaving. Their departure wasn't the end, but the beginning. Sect leader, the people of the War King sect are too arrogant, said the third elder in the main hall of the sect. It doesn't matter whether they are arrogant or not. We need to prepare. Soon, the people of the War King sect will come again, said the second elder. We don't know the background and details of the War King sect. This is a disadvantage. Chu Mu said, however, the War King sect doesn't know much about the true sword sect either. So, when the time comes, we will give them a big surprise. Sect leader, apart from us, does the true sword sect have any external help? Asked the fourth elder. The other elders also had inquisitive looks on their faces. From what they knew, the entire true sword sect only had 14 saint rank experts, including the sect master. Including the other 3 guest elders, there were only 17. Among them, 7 were still 1-star saints. Although Chu Mu wasn't a normal 1-star saint rank, he was probably equivalent to a 3-star saint rank. The strongest of them all, the great elder, was only at the peak of 6-star saint. As for the radiant sword Saint Xiajinkong, although he was a 7-star saint, he wasn't an elder of the true sword sect. He was only a guest elder and was far away in another region. It would take more than a month to notify him and then rush back. The War King sect wouldn't give the true sword sect that much time. Could it be that they had to ask for help from the Kenglin royal family? That wasn't a good idea, but it was better than being destroyed by the War King sect as a last resort. Elders, there's no need to waste time guessing. You will know when the time comes. Chu Mu smiled mysteriously. Even if the War King sect sends out a 9-star saint, we won't be afraid. Hearing this, everyone's hearts trembled. Currently, the True Sword sect didn't even have a single 7-star saint, let alone a 9-star saint that was many times stronger than a 7-star saint. In their place, a 9-star saint was simply an invincible existence that could destroy them with a single breath. They didn't understand where the sect leader's confidence came from, but Chu Mu's tone and demeanor didn't seem like he was joking. Everyone suddenly realized something. Could it be that Chu Mu had obtained other opportunities in the ancient sacred city that could allow him to resist a 9-star saint? With this thought in mind, the elders heaved a sigh of relief. All right, elders, there's no need to think too much. What will come will come, Chu Mu said as he looked outside the main hall. Moreover, this is also an opportunity. Elders, you can spread the news of the War King sect and praise their strength. This is a chance to test whether the disciples are truly loyal to the sect. In addition, send down a strict order. Any disciple who leaves the True Sword sect is not allowed to spread the True Sword sect's sword techniques. Otherwise, we will investigate and kill without mercy. Chapter 1576. Within the True Sword sect, discussions were everywhere. If they can destroy a second-rate force so easily, then wouldn't the Battle King sect be able to destroy our True Sword sect easily? What should we do? When Chu Mu told the elders to secretly praise the great Battle King sect and spread the news of the Battle King sect's tyrannical way of doing things, as well as stating that the disciples had the freedom to choose whether to live and die with the True Sword sect or leave the true sword sect. The disciples were all shocked and had their own thoughts. I want to leave the true sword sect. A God-congealing realm disciple said. What do you mean by that? You usually enjoy all the resources of the sect, but when the sect is in trouble, you want to leave. Despicable. Someone reprimanded. I'm the hope of my family. If I die, my family might not be able to recover. So I can't die. I want to leave too. A second person said, Senior Brotherly, let's go together. Since I joined the True Sword sect and became its disciple, my life has been closely related to the True Sword sect. If you want to leave, you can leave. I'll stay. However, from now on, you and I have nothing to do with each other. Take care of yourself. Among the inner disciples, elite disciples, and even core disciples, there were some who were shaken and chose to leave. The Battle King sect was simply too powerful. They could even destroy second-rate forces, let alone a quasi-second-rate force like the True Sword sect. There was simply no way to resist them. Once the Battle King sect launched a large-scale invasion, what awaited the True Sword sect was likely to be annihilated. Naturally, the Battle King sect would also be annihilated. No one wanted to die, especially when they couldn't resist at all. It was the most depressing thing. Some disciples made their choice and left the True Sword sect. However, they were also quite worried that the True Sword sect would not allow them to leave. In order to survive, 2 of them carefully walked out of the True Sword sect without any obstructions. Behind them, a large group of people looked at them, all of them feeling incredibly nervous. No one stopped them. Let's try again. After walking out of the sect, the 2 continued forward. Their speed was getting faster and faster, and they were getting further and further away from the True Sword sect. Not long after, the 2 figures disappeared before everyone's eyes. They're fine. Let's go. The group of people who were watching from inside the sect immediately shouted happily. They all gathered their strength and rushed out of the sect in the blink of an eye. A group of traitors. These people deserve to die. The disciples who didn't leave looked at the people who left coldly. They were furious. To think that I thought of him as a good brother. I didn't expect him to be such a person at such a critical moment. A friend in need is a friend indeed. Loyalty and righteousness are only known in life and death. That kind of person is not qualified to be with us. It's good that he left. Everyone, I actually have an idea. One of the core disciples suddenly said, I'm afraid that those who leave now will soon regret what they did today. That's right. They are a bunch of vile people. They were groomed by the sect, but abandoned the sect at a critical moment. Even if people like them are still alive, they will be condemned by their conscience day and night. No, that's not what I meant. My guess is that the Battle King sect's strength and their large-scale invasion is true. However, our True Sword sect is not completely powerless. The core disciple's eyes lit up, and his tone gradually became more certain. This time, it is very likely that this is a test for the sect. When the sect is facing a life and death crisis, how many people are truly loyal to the sect? If what you said is true, then those who leave now will lose the opportunity to be groomed by the sect. They will definitely regret it. I hope so. I sincerely hope so. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. On the first day, the disciples only discussed and didn't do anything. It wasn't until the second day that some people decided to leave. On the third day, some people finally left the True Sword sect. Some people took the lead and weren't stopped. Nothing unexpected happened. The rest of the people who were planning to leave all left. Today was the 4th day. The disciples who hadn't left yet were those who felt a sense of belonging to the True Sword sect. They wanted to stay and advance with the True Sword sect. In just 3 days, the True Sword sect experienced an unforeseen event. However, the effect of this event wasn't too great. It didn't affect the outside world. It was controlled within the True Sword sect. Therefore, the outside world didn't know about this yet. However, The disciples who left would spread the news sooner or later. In the main hall of the sect, Chu Mu sat at the head of the table. Sect Master, a total of 1,300 inner disciples have left the sect. 350 elite disciples have left. A total of 123 core disciples have left, reported Yang Zhen. Yang Zhen was currently the weakest of the saints in the True Sword sect. He couldn't even compare to Yun Feng and Yun He, who had just undergone the Aeon Tribulation. Yang Zhen wasn't an elder of the True Sword sect. Chu Mu had given him the authority to supervise the True Sword sect, so he was naturally in charge of the statistics. Over 1,700 people have left. Chu Mu narrowed his eyes and gently tapped the back of his chair. Put these people on the blacklist. After the incident with the Battle Kings sect, these people and anyone related to them will never be allowed to enter the True Sword sect. Kill all violators. Among the 1,700 disciples who had left the True Sword sect, there were some with some background. Yes, Yang Zhen was Chu Mu's servant. He had been forced to submit to Chu Mu from the very beginning. He obeyed everything Chu Mu said. After the 1,700 disciples left the sect, the news began to spread. The True Sword sect has rejected the recruitment of the Battle King sect. They will face destruction. As soon as the news spread, it immediately caused quite a stir. In the past few years, the True Sword sect had developed very quickly. They were in the limelight, and there was basically no one in the entire Kanglan Empire who didn't know about them. There were people who envied them, and there were even more people who were jealous. If it weren't for the fact that there seemed to be a Saint King behind the True Sword sect, there would have been people who would have moved against them long ago. The Kanglan imperial family would never have tried to befriend the True Sword sect. However, the Battle King sect had suddenly appeared with a mysterious background. They gave off a very domineering feeling. As soon as they appeared, they started conquering everywhere. By now, there were already several dozen third-rate and quasi-second-rate organizations that had submitted to them. The Battle King's sect's strength had increased by a lot. Just think about it. The Battle King's sect was already suspected to be a second-rate organization. Now that several dozen third-rate and quasi-second-rate organizations had submitted to them, the Battle King's sect's strength had increased by several times. The strange thing was that the quasi-first-rate and first-rate organizations didn't do anything. It was as if they didn't know about this, or as if they knew but didn't want to care. Even the Kanglan imperial family didn't do anything. How could the Kanglan imperial family not know about such a huge commotion in the Kanglan Empire? They definitely knew, but they didn't care or didn't want to care for some reason. Right now, the mysterious Battle King sect was about to clash with the True Sword sect that seemed to have some background. Who would win and who would lose? If the two sides fought, would even more secrets be exposed? For example, the origins of the Battle King sect, whether the True Sword sect really had the Heavenly Sword Saint as their backer, and so on. However, the majority of the public opinion still leaned towards the True Sword sect being unable to defeat the Battle King sect. On the 5th day, the disciples were all cultivating. It seemed like nothing had changed, but that was impossible. The atmosphere was somewhat stifling, as if a storm was about to come. On the 6th day, the atmosphere became even more stifling, making people feel uncomfortable. Before an unknown danger arrived, it was the most unbearable. Moreover, everything was just a guess. Whether the True Sword sect could resist the Battle King sect was still unknown. If they couldn't resist, they would be destroyed, and only death would await them. On the 7th day, Chu Mu let the 10 esoteric disciples spread the news to appease the disciples. The news clearly stated that the True Sword sect didn't fear the Battle King sect. As for whether they could understand it, it was up to the disciples themselves. On the 8th day, the 2 3-star sword saints that Chu Mu had sent out to patrol, Long Yi and Wen Fei, came back with news. In front, many flying ships were rapidly approaching, and inside the ships were saint-level experts. They're finally here. Chu Mu's eyes lit up when he received the news. He immediately gathered the elders. The elders had also been waiting for this day to come, and all of them had made their preparations. Therefore, when they heard Chu Mu's news, they immediately rushed over. "Elders, let's arrange the disciples. We'll meet the enemy outside the sect," said Chu Mu. Arranging the disciples was to prevent any fish from escaping the net, or perhaps some saint-level expert would secretly attack the disciples, causing unnecessary casualties. It had to be known that the disciples who dared to stay behind to live and die with the true sword sect were those who truly felt a sense of belonging to the sect. They were disciples worth nurturing, and they couldn't afford to lose them. As for meeting the enemy outside the sect, it was because they didn't want to cause any damage to the sect. A battle between saint-level experts would cause huge fluctuations, and the power was shocking. It could easily shatter a mountain. Unless they weren't confident in winning, they wouldn't lead the enemy into the sect and activate the grand formation. Moving quickly after Chu Mu gave the order, everything was quickly arranged. With Chu Mu in the lead, there were 9 elders and 4 servants of Chu Mu. A total of 14 saint-level experts flew up and quickly flew out of the sect. As for Gulwankong and the other 2, they didn't appear. They were still somewhere in the true sword sect, waiting for an opportunity. The warlord sect is coming. Can the sect leader and the others fight back? I believe in the sect leader. They definitely can. The gathered disciples all looked up at the sky in the distance. They looked at the 14 figures in the sky outside the mountain gate and spoke one after another. Damn it. If I had the strength of a saint-level expert, I wouldn't have to hide here. A core disciple clenched his fist and said angrily, "Work hard and cultivate. One day, we can also fight for the survival of the sect," said an esoteric disciple coldly. Chapter 1577. One after another, flying ships flew over rapidly from afar. Every flying ship had a different appearance. This was a fleet of flying ships. Flying at the very front was a dazzling and luxurious flying ship. It was about 100 meters long and was shaped like a shuttle. The flying ship was covered in strange patterns. It looked very advanced. There was a circle on the side of the flying ship, and within the circle was a large battle character. It was the flying ship of the battle monarch sect. 1, 2, 3. A total of several dozen flying ships headed in the direction of the true sword sect. Each flying ship gave off a cold aura that was shocking. Each flying ship represents a faction. 58 flying ships. Aside from the flying ships of the battle monarch sect, the other 57 are the flying ships of the third-rate and quasi-second-rate factions that the battle monarch sect has subdued. In the past, the battle monarch sect would not send out too many people. This time, however, they've sent out the experts of their own faction and all the factions that have submitted to them. It looks like they're planning to display their full strength. The true sword sect has been in the limelight recently. It's the perfect time to strike. Many saints followed from the left and right. They came from various factions, and there were also experts from the Kanglin royal family. They wanted to personally witness the battle that was about to begin. In the sky above the true sword sect, Chu Mu led a dozen saints to stand in the air. They looked ahead, waiting for the arrival of their powerful enemies. Suddenly, black shadows appeared in front of them. There were dozens of them. Those black shadows rapidly grew larger and larger as they rapidly approached them. "Sect Master, they're here," said the second elder. His eyes glinted. "There are 58 flying ships in total. Even if each flying ship only has 1 saint, there are still 58 saints," said the third elder in a low voice. Clearly, there was a great disparity between the 2 factions. On the true sword sect side, there were only 14 saint rank experts. Including Chu Mu, there were 4 1-star saints. The difference in strength between them and the opponent was huge. Moreover, it was still unknown whether there was only 1 saint-level expert in each flying ship. The possibility was relatively small. Perhaps they would be facing over 100 saint-level experts. Among them, there would be low-level saint-level experts, and there would definitely be mid-level saint-level experts. As for whether there would be any high-level saint-level experts, that was unknown. Even if there weren't any high-level martial saints, just these mid-level and low-level martial saints were enough to crush a dozen martial saints. Among the crowd, only Chu Mu's expression remained the same, as if what was about to arrive was not a strong enemy, but a group of chickens and dogs. Seeing Chu Mu's expression, the elders who were originally solemn heaved a sigh of relief. In their impression, the sect master was tough, but he was not a reckless person. He must have a trump card, and that trump card was enough to deal with the incoming strong enemy. Every single flying ship was extremely fast. They had originally been tiny black dots, but now, after just a few short exchanges, a complete silhouette appeared before everyone's eyes. A shocking pressure seemed to sweep over. Everyone, this battle concerns the life and death of our True Sword sect. Perhaps the True Sword sect will truly rise, but the True Sword sect will become history. Chu Mu spoke unhurriedly. This was the truth. When it came from Chu Mu's mouth, it sounded so normal. However, when everyone heard it, their expressions became solemn. Don't worry, sect master. Ever since I became a disciple of the True Sword sect several thousand years ago, my life has always belonged to the True Sword sect. Whoever wants to touch the True Sword sect will have to face my sword first, said the first elder solemnly. The other elders all nodded. When it came to feelings for the True Sword sect, no one was as deep as them. It's necessary to use our full strength, but there's no need to be so pessimistic. Unless the Battle King sect sends out a large number of high-level saints or a supreme expert, we'll definitely win, said Chu Mu. Shocking battle intent gradually surged in the depths of his eyes. 58 flying ships lined up in a row, descending from the sky in an imposing manner. Afterwards, the flying ships stopped one by one. The doors opened, and figures flew out one after another. 2 figures, one male and one female, flew out of the leading golden flying ship. 2 figures flew out from each of the other flying ships. There were 2 people on each ship, so a total of 116 people flew out from the 58 ships. Every single one of them was a saint, and they all radiated with powerful auras. The 114 saints were led by the 2 golden-robed men and women from the Battle King sect. They quickly flew towards Chu Mu's group. The 2 golden-robed men and women from the Battle King sect were the 2 who had come to accept the True Sword sect's offer. Earlier, they had fled from the swords of the True Sword sect's elders. Now that they had returned, they sneered. I've already said that only destruction awaits if you don't submit. True Sword sect, your end is here, said the golden-robed man coldly. Of course, you still have one last chance. As long as you kneel right now and count out to us 3 times, and shout that the True Sword sect has submitted to the Battle King sect and will follow the Battle King sect's lead in the future, we'll spare your worthless lives. The golden-robed woman's voice was just as harsh as before. The other saints were all expressionless. They were all saints from other organizations who had submitted to the Battle King sect through force. They did not submit to the Battle King sect from the bottom of their hearts, so they did not agree with the golden-robed man and woman's words. However, they had to listen to them, or their families and friends within their organizations would suffer. Draw your swords, said Chu Mu indifferently. His voice was extremely forceful, making everyone's hearts tremble. The melodious sounds of sword light immediately rang out. Like meteors streaking across the sky, they moved in unison as if they had practiced this thousands of times. They all pointed forward. The swords of the saints of the True Sword sect were perfectly straight as they pointed forward. Their neat movements and unstoppable momentum made all the disciples of the True Sword sect extremely excited. Their blood began to boil. I want to fight as well. I want to become stronger. I want to become a saint. I want to fight for the sect. The disciples were all encouraged, and they made up their minds to become even more determined. In the distance, many figures hovered in the air and looked over. They were from other organizations. They did not belong to the Battle King sect, nor did they belong to the True Sword sect. 100 people against 14 people. It's not even a fraction. This time, the True Sword sect is finished. The difference in numbers is too great. Although the Battle King sect does not have any high-level saints, they have 3 peak 6-star saints. Moreover, the 2 envoys of the Battle King sect are at the late stage of the 6-star saints. Their strength is comparable to an ordinary peak 6-star saints, so they have 5 of them. On the other hand, the True Sword sect only has 1 peak 6-star saint, and 4 of them are early stage 1-star saints. Unless the True Sword sect really has some kind of trump card, they will not be able to escape this time, said a saint who analyzed the situation logically. You still want to resist? It seems like you really want to be exterminated, said the golden-robed woman sharply. You think you can stop the Battle King sect with just a dozen pieces of trash. Kill, shouted the golden-robed man. Then a powerful energy surged from their bodies. There were more than 100 saints. Among them, 30 were mid-level saints. The rest were all low-level saints. As their auras surged, the sky changed color and the energy of heaven and earth surged. The saints of the True Sword sect were shocked. Strike first and gain the upper hand. The saints of the True Sword sect had already mobilized their sword origin before their opponents had even begun to attack. They used powerful sword techniques and slashed out without holding back at all. In an instant, dazzling, cold, and resplendent sword light tore through the sky. The sword light was like the scorching sun, the waning moon, the rolling thunder, the crumbling of mountains, the surging of rivers. Different sword sages and different sword techniques were displayed at this moment. So that's how that move should be used. I understand now. The disciples outside the True Sword sect watched. A small portion of them seemed to have understood something. It was easy to tell if an expert was skilled or not. As soon as the sword saints of the True Sword sect attacked, their powerful sword moves and terrifying sword lights caused the expressions of 100 or so saints to change abruptly. Disperse! Roared the golden-robed man. Golden light bloomed from his body as a powerful aura surged. His battle intent was shocking. I refuse to believe that a dozen pieces of trash like you can defeat us. Kill them all. Leave no one alive. The golden-robed woman's voice was sharp and furious. Kill them all, then kill all the disciples of the sect. Leave no one alive. The 2 cultivators from the Battle King sect were the first to attack. They released a gigantic ball of golden light, which contained a destructive power. It whistled through the air as it shot towards the Battle King sect. Immediately after, the other saints also attacked. They were all expressionless before, but they didn't show any mercy when they attacked. Speaking of which, they didn't have any enmity with the True Sword sect, nor did they have any conflicts of interest. However, because they had submitted to the Battle King sect and belonged to their faction, the True Sword sect was the Battle King sect's enemy. In other words, they were their enemy. Every saint had matured through countless life and death situations. They all understood that they had to be cruel to their enemies. They couldn't show any mercy, or they would be cruel to themselves. Since the saints of the True Sword sect had been identified as their enemy, they wouldn't show any mercy, even if there was a great disparity in numbers. In just a single exchange, the attacks of the True Sword sect sword saints were all destroyed. A portion of the powerful light blasted over, tearing through the sky. It was as if mountains were collapsing and the earth was cracking. Thunder rumbled, and the might was extremely shocking. The entire sky was filled with energy of various colors. The yuan qi of the world was extremely chaotic, and the power of all sorts of laws was drawn in. From afar, the sky seemed to be torn apart, about to shatter. It was filled with terrifying ripples of destruction. Chapter 1578. Amidst the countless energy attacks, Chu Mu's eyes lit up and he grasped the trajectory of each energy beam. His body swayed left and right as he easily dodged each attack. On the other hand, the others didn't have this ability. They could only use their swords to block the attacks while dodging. In one collision, a dozen saints of the True Sword sect were sent flying by the terrifying impact of energy. Their blood and chi were in turmoil. If they hadn't cultivated in the profound Yang Sword Hall for a period of time, their blood and chi would have been vigorous and their physiques stronger. Otherwise, the impact would have made them vomit blood. A mantis trying to stop a chariot. The golden-robed man from the Battle King's sect didn't immediately attack again. Instead, he revealed a disdainful expression. In his eyes, the True Sword sect wasn't a threat at all. If he wanted to destroy them, it would be as easy as flipping his palm. The disciples of the True Sword sect stared with their eyes wide open. Their breathing was rapid and their blood was in turmoil. They unconsciously clenched their fists. They wanted nothing more than to fight the enemy on behalf of the elders. Everyone could see that the True Sword sect was powerless to fight against the Battle King sect. If nothing unexpected happened, the True Sword sect was finished. Apart from Chu Mu, the other 13 people of the True Sword sect were all pushed back. The weaker ones had their blood and chi surging. Their faces were pale and they were slightly injured. The difference in strength was too great. Even if I die, I'll drag a few of you down with me. The Grand Elder had a fiery temper in his early years. After many years of cultivation, his temper had improved. However, he would still explode at the critical moment. Powerful energy surged in his body. Sword energy surged like a tide. An astonishing sharpness soared into the sky from the Grand Elder's body. The wind and clouds in the sky changed. As the Yuan Qi of the world gathered, it formed a vortex that slowly rotated. The center of the vortex seemed to be penetrated by an invisible force. The Grand Elder's aura grew stronger and stronger. It actually surpassed the peak of the 6-star Saint Realm and showed signs of reaching the 7-star Saint Realm. "Stop him!" The golden-robed man from the Battle King's sect roared. If the Grand Elder really broke through, even if he was just a 7-star saint, he would be able to crush them. This was because the 7-star Saint Realm was a high-level Saint Realm. There was a huge gap between them and the 7-star Saint Realm. The others from the True Sword sect were startled. They immediately rushed out to protect the Great Elder. The people from the Battle King sect also understood that if they allowed the other party to break through successfully, the result would be different. They had to interrupt the other party and kill him to prevent future troubles. At this moment, Chu Mu, who hadn't made a move until now, made his move. His body seemed to tremble slightly, and an invisible force spread out in an instant, covering an area of 3,000 meters. More than 100 saints from the Battle King sect and more than a dozen from the True Sword sect were all covered by it. What happened? The people from the War King's sect were startled. Most of them felt that their powers were being suppressed. It was as if there were invisible restraints on their bodies. It was extremely uncomfortable. Only those 6-star martial saints circulated their essence force and immediately broke the bindings. They were unaffected. A few days ago, there was a heavy snowfall. I gained some enlightenment. Chu Mu opened his mouth and spoke in a neither fast nor slow manner. His appearance was as if he was chatting idly with someone, and not the slightest trace of nervousness or desolation could be seen from him. It has been perfected over the past few days. Today, I invite everyone to take a look at it. I shall name it Snowgale Sword Domain. Sect leader is so cool. Some of the female disciples' eyes lit up. One day, I want to be like the sect master. Some of the male disciples were looking forward to it. Facing over 100 Saint Realm experts, Zhang Xian showed no fear at all. His tone was calm, as if he didn't care about the other party at all. This kind of attitude and magnanimity was truly admirable. Of course, only the people from the True Sword sect were impressed. The people from the Battle King's sect were furious. How pretentious! Some of the people watching from afar curled their lips in disdain. At this time, snow-white patches appeared around Chumu. They looked like snowflakes that surrounded Chumu. There were more than 300 of them, like fairies dancing between heaven and earth. Then a gust of wind blew past, blowing 300 snow-white pieces of chi towards the Battle King sect saints, without the slightest trace of smoke or fire. This is the so-called Snowgill sword domain. Are you here to put on a show to please us? The golden-robed man sneered. He stretched out his hand and clapped. His palm instantly enlarged and overflowed with golden light. A strong gust of wind blasted towards the snow-white patches. The snow-white patches were very light. Under the attack, it was as if they were blown away by the wind. They floated to the side without any damage. Then watch my performance. Chumu was not angry at all. He said indifferently. Then an extremely bright light flashed in his eyes. It was as if a treasured sword had been unsheathed. It was so dazzling that many Saint Realm experts couldn't help but close their eyes or cover their eyes with their hands. His primordial spirit, which was at the pinnacle of level 2, released a powerful spiritual power. He instantly guided the eternal sword will, the divine wilderness sword energy, and the level 9 sword energy into each snow-white piece. In an instant, each snow-white piece flashed with a touch of light. It was a threatening edge. Everyone realized that the snow-white patches, which were originally light and weightless, now had a unique metallic texture. They were guided by spiritual energy and controlled by spiritual energy. Snowkill! With a soft sound, all the martial saints within the sword domain felt as if a gust of cold wind had blown past. Those who were weaker, such as the low-level martial saints and the 4-star martial saints, felt their bodies involuntarily shiver, as if they had suddenly arrived at a place where ice and snow had fallen. Only the 5-star and 6-star martial saints were able to resist it. As the 300 snow-white flakes fluttered in the air, they trembled, and an incomparably sharp luster flashed across them. The light, snow-white flakes shook their bodies and became sharp and hard. In an instant, they streaked through the air in Chumu's sword domain and shot towards each of the Battle King sect's sacred rank experts. The 300 snow-white patches covered the 116 people on the other side. Insignificant tricks. The golden-robed man from the Battle King sect sneered. He raised his palm and slammed it heavily. The sound of wind and thunder surged and golden light whistled. With a loud bang, the 3 snow-white patches that shot towards the golden-robed man were shattered by the golden palm. After all, the golden-robed man was an expert at the peak of the 6-star Saint Realm. Chumu's strength was not enough to fight against him. The moment the 6-star Saint Realm expert attacked, the snow-white patches turned into white dots and dissipated. The 5-star saints attacked, but they were not as direct as the 6-star saints. Instead, the snow-white patches dodged them like butterflies fluttering in the wind. The 4-star saint level experts and those below the 4-star saint level all attacked one after another in an attempt to shatter the snow-white light. However, they all failed. The power contained within the snow-white light was not something they could resist at all. Their attacks were directly torn apart when they clashed head-on. Even the low-level Saint Realm experts did not have time to react. They only saw the snow-white patches flash past their eyes. Following that, they felt a tearing pain from their necks and between their eyebrows, spreading throughout their bodies. Every snow-white cloud that flew past the 4-star martial saints and low-level martial saints would leave behind a trail of scarlet blood. The red and white patches reflected each other. In the eyes of the crowd, it looked so demonic. This time, the Battle King sect had mobilized a total of 116 saints. Among them, there were more than 30 mid-level saints. The rest were low-level saints. Among the 30 mid-level saints, there were 15 4-star saints, 10 5-star saints, and 8 6-star saints. Chu Mu's single attack had killed 15 4-star saints and 70 to 80 low-level saints in one fell swoop. Only 10 5-star saints and 8 6-star saints were left. Everything happened too quickly. In the instant that the 6-star saints attacked and the 5-star saints resisted the snow-white patches, the 4-star saints and low-level saints had their necks or between their eyebrows torn apart by the snow-white patches. What's going on? Those people are all dead? In the distance, the group of saints who were watching from the sidelines were dumbfounded. This was impossible. This didn't conform to the rules. It wasn't impossible for someone to kill dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of people in an instant. For example, a saint-level expert could easily kill a large group of Nirvana realm experts in an instant, and killing tens of thousands of divine condensation realm experts with a single strike was also possible, so it wasn't strange at all. However, that was based on the situation where the difference in cultivation was obviously too great. In terms of cultivation base, Chu Mu was indeed much weaker than those saints who had died. However, this difference was because Chu Mu was weaker than them. Chu Mu's cultivation base was very clear. He was only at the early first, heavenly layer of the Aeon realm. Those saints who had died were at least at the late second, heavenly layer of the Aeon realm. The difference in cultivation base between them was one major realm and 2 minor realms. Alright, it was rumored that the sect master of the True Sword sect, Chu Mu, was a super genius, a monstrous genius. He had once killed a 2-star saint with his Nirvana realm cultivation base. As a 1-star saint, it wasn't impossible for him to fight against a 3-star saint. However, among the 100 saints who had died, there were not only 2-star saints, but there were also 3-star saints and even 4-star saints. Killing a 2-star saint in an instant was shocking. Killing a 3-star saint in an instant was shocking. But what was going on with killing a 4-star saint in an instant? A 1-star saint in the early first level could kill a group of 4-star saints, as well as a large group of 3-star saints and 2-star saints. Was this world crazy? The Battle King sect saints, who were still alive, finally reacted. Looking at the bodies that were falling down like dumplings, they were indescribably shocked. On the True Sword sect side, the dozen or so saints had their mouths agape. Their eyes bulged as their minds froze. The disciples of the True Sword sect were all petrified, unable to move. What they had seen with their own eyes just now was truly a dream. Chapter 1579. Outside the True Sword sect, corpses were strewn about in various postures. They were all the corpses of the saints who had been killed earlier. Even their souls had dispersed. Actually, Chu Mu really wanted to take their Yuan spirits and use the great art of soul ignition to make his heavenly puppets grow quickly. Unfortunately, he couldn't do that in front of so many people. Otherwise, the True Sword sect wouldn't just have to face the Battle King sect. There would also be other powers watching from the sidelines. Those quasi-first-rate, first-rate, and even super first-rate powers wouldn't turn a blind eye to it. At that time, the True Sword sect would truly be annihilated. Even the Heavenly Sword saint wouldn't be able to help. Chu Mu was very clear on which was more important. They're all dead. The 2 envoys from the Battle King sect felt like their heads were about to explode. They were about to go crazy. With just 1 strike, he had killed nearly 100 saint-level experts. Although these people weren't saint-level experts trained by the Battle King sect, they were still saint-level experts who had been recruited by the Battle King sect. They had strengthened the Battle King sect's strength and reputation. Their deaths meant that the Battle King sect's strength was weakened. Most importantly, when the 2 of them had reported to the sect master, they had promised that they would exterminate the True Sword sect without losing a single soldier before setting off with this group of saint-level powerhouses. The Battle King sect had analyzed the True Sword sect, taking into account all kinds of possibilities. They had analyzed the strength of the True Sword sect's experts, which was why they were confident that with over 100 saints working together, Even the true sword sect saints wouldn't be able to kill them. Instead, they would be killed. However, the result was unexpected. It was completely unexpected. The sect master of the true sword sect, who was only a 1-star early-stage saint, was actually able to kill a 4-star saint instantly. Chu Mu's shocking strength was mainly in ancient sacred city. However, ancient sacred city was huge. Those who were dead didn't bring any news out. Those who were alive didn't know what Chu Mu was. Some didn't even know his name. The intact snow-white object flew towards Chu Mu and circled around him once before disappearing. The Snow Slaughter sword domain only had this much strength at the moment. If he attacked a second time, Chu Mu's spiritual energy would be almost completely depleted. It would not be beneficial for the following battle. However, even if Chu Mu had the power to launch a second attack without affecting himself, he would not use it. Now that his opponent was on guard, it would be difficult to kill a 5-star martial saint, and it would be impossible to kill a 6-star martial saint. Even so, the first strike of the Snowkill sword realm had shocked countless people. At that moment, Chu Mu's figure and his fluttering snow-white robes entered everyone's eyes and were deeply imprinted in their minds. "You must die, you must die." The golden-robed man from the Battle King's sect stared at Chu Mu with bloodshot eyes. His breathing was rapid like a bull's as he stared fiercely at Chu Mu. His scarlet eyes were like that of an enraged beast, filled with terrifying killing intent. Chu Mu's body tensed up as a chill attacked him. He circulated his sword energy and dispelled the chill. His expression did not change, but his energy was mobilized. The sword god's descent secret technique was about to explode at any moment. Behind him, the great elder's aura was getting stronger and stronger. The whirlpool in the sky was getting stronger and more obvious, bringing with it a dark pressure. His Snow Slaughter sword domain cannot deal with us. Attack, leave no one alive. The golden-robed woman shrieked. The Battle King sect still had 8 6-star saints and 10 5-star saints left. Whether it was in terms of numbers or strength, they were superior to the true sword sect. "You all have no chance," Chu Mu said softly. Then he waved his sleeve and black figures rushed out, spreading out in the surroundings. 1 figure, 2 figures, 3 figures. Those black figures were not humans. Instead, they were huge black metal puppets. Every single one of them gave off an icy aura. It was shocking. There were a total of 27 puppets lined up in a row. Suddenly, the gloomy eyes of the 27 puppets flashed with a bright light. A powerful aura immediately spread out from the puppets' bodies. Among them, there were 12 puppets that gave off ripples of aura that let people know that they had the power of a 3-star saint. 9 of the puppets gave off ripples of aura that reached the level of a 4-star saint, while 6 of the puppets gave off ripples of aura that reached the level of a 5-star saint. The sudden change made everyone jump in fright. Then, they clearly sensed the auras of the 27 puppets. The people of the Battle King sect let out a sigh of relief and smiled. Even though there were 27 of them, the strongest among them was only a 5-star saint. On the other hand, the weakest among them was a 5-star saint, while the strongest among them was a 6-star saint at the pinnacle. They weren't even on the same level. "Very good. I'll take these puppets." The golden-robed man from the Battle King sect was overjoyed. The attack on the True Sword sect this time had unexpectedly resulted in the loss of close to 100 4-star saints and low-level saints. Even if they managed to destroy the True Sword sect, they would definitely be punished when they returned. If they could bring these 27 puppets back to make up for their mistakes, not only would they not be punished, they might even be rewarded. After all, the weakest of the 27 puppets was 3-star saints, while the strongest was 5-star saints. They were much stronger than the dead saints. If that's the case, then take them. Chu Mu said indifferently. The puppets began to move, moving rapidly in the air. Saint-level puppets were the same as saint-level experts. They could fly. The 12 3-star saint-level puppets instantly changed positions and charged towards the 5-star saint-level powerhouse at an astonishing speed. The 9 4-star saint-level puppets also activated and charged towards the 5-star saint-level powerhouse at an even faster speed. Finally, the 6 5-star saint-level puppets turned into 6 streaks of black light and shot towards the 6-star saint-level powerhouse in an arc. The 12 3-star saint-level puppets formed a level 3 puppet formation. The 9 4-star saint-level puppets formed a level 4 puppet formation. The 6 5-star saint-level puppets formed a level 5 puppet formation. Formation. These puppets actually know how to form formations. The knowledgeable martial saints felt their hearts skip a beat, and the corners of their eyes twitched uncontrollably. A strong sense of foreboding welled up in their hearts, as if something bad was about to happen. In an instant, the 4 5-star martial saints were surrounded by the level 3 puppet array. The 6 5-star martial saints were also surrounded by the level 4 puppet array. The 8 6-star martial saints were also trapped by the level 5 puppet array. The moment they entered the puppet formation, the expressions of the Battle King's sex saints changed drastically. They felt a terrifying pressure coming from the puppets that surrounded them. It was as if the puppets were a perfect whole without any flaws. In an instant, the remaining 18 5-star saints and 6-star saints of the Battle King sect were all surrounded by the puppets. They were trapped by the puppets. When the level 3 puppet formation was activated, the 12 3-star saint-level puppets' strength merged into one, increasing each other's strength. When they attacked with their swords, the strength of each attack reached the 5-star saint level. The 4 5-star saints' expressions changed drastically as they hurriedly tried to defend themselves. The speed at which the puppets drew their swords was not slow. Under the coordination of the 12 swords, they slashed out continuously. Every strike was a threat to them. As for the counterattacks of the 4 5-star martial saints, when they hit the puppets, they were instantly deflected and dispersed. Only 1/12 of their power actually hit the puppets. The bodies of the puppets were originally very strong. They were 100 times, 1,000 times stronger than the bodies of humans. When the strength of the puppets was divided into 1/12 of their strength, it was impossible to cause any damage to them unless they had the strength of a 6-star saint-level saint. In an instant, the 4 5-star martial saints were trapped and unable to break free. They could only hold on bitterly. They didn't understand the structure of these puppets and didn't have the same ability as Chu Mu. On the other side, the 6 5-star saint-level powerhouses, who were surrounded by the level 4 puppets, were terrified. They realized that the power of every sword attack from the puppets had exceeded the 5-star saint level. It had reached the 6-star saint level. Every sword attack made them feel a sense of fatal danger. The 6 5-star martial saints worked together and unleashed all of their power. They unleashed a secret technique that boosted their strength and fought against the level 4 puppet formation. In the last area, the 8 6-star saints who were surrounded by the level 5 puppet formation were horrified. The powerful 7-star saint level energy waves kept attacking their minds like endless waves. The difference in strength between a middle saint level and a high saint level caused their limbs to go numb and their thoughts to become sluggish. They were horrified and hurriedly unleashed their secret techniques with all their might. Under the amplification of the level 5 puppet formation, the 6 5-star saint-level puppets unleashed their swords at the same time. The 5-star saint-level puppets focused on speed. Their swords were extremely fast, like 6 streaks of black light streaking across the sky, filling the level 5 puppet formation. The power of each sword attack had reached the 7-star saint level. The 6-star saint level powerhouses tried their best to dodge and defend, but the difference in strength between a 6-star saint and a 7-star saint was too big. 3 6-star saint level powerhouses couldn't resist at all. Their bodies were torn apart in one slash. 2 6-star saint-level powerhouses from the Battle King sect were trembling violently. Their bodies were lacerated and blood spurted out like fountains. The 3 6-star saint-level powerhouses who were at the peak of the 6-star saint-level powerhouses barely managed to defend against the sword attack. Their bodies were trembling violently, and their faces were pale. They were injured. As long as the puppets didn't run out of energy, as long as their core wasn't destroyed, and as long as their master didn't give the order to stop, they would continue attacking. When the second sword attack was unleashed, the remaining 3 6-star saint-level powerhouses couldn't withstand it anymore. They couldn't even self-detonate and were killed instantly. The blood-curdling screams were incomparably shrill as they spread out in all directions, causing everyone to shudder and feel inexplicably horrified. Chapter 1580. 11 and 12 brought so many people out. Isn't that too much? In a side hall of the warlord sect, a person was lying lazily on a golden, fur-covered bench. His eyes were half closed, as if he was about to fall asleep. His long hair covered half of his face, giving off a demonic feeling. Old 3, do you think 11 and 12 can compare to you? Not far away, a burly man wearing a golden robe sat. He looked like a golden iron tower. Just by sitting there, he gave off a strong sense of pressure. 11 and 12 did this to ensure that nothing goes wrong. After all, the True Sword sect has risen very quickly, and we don't know if they have any trump cards. Also, we can show the strength of the warlord sect to other sections. It will be helpful for us to conquer other sects in the future. All right, you can think about this. Old 3 shook his finger and said lazily, Old 3, you're too lazy. Otherwise, you wouldn't be stuck at the peak of the 6-star saint level. The burly man said helplessly, My cultivation is different from yours. Old 3 said, The Tao of the primordial spirit is indeed different from ours. The burly man shook his head. They're all dead. This is simply unbelievable. Outside the gates of the True Sword sect, the saints who were watching from afar were all in a daze as they mumbled to themselves. This was completely different from what they had imagined. Although they had some guesses that the True Sword sect might have some unknown method to defend against the warlord sect's attack, they definitely didn't expect it to be like this. It could be said that the sect master of the True Sword sect alone was enough to deal with 100 saints of the warlord sect. Of those 3 puppet arrays, the 5-star saint level one is comparable to a 7-star saint level expert. The True Sword sect is actually so strong that they can be ranked as a second-rate sect. The warlord sect has kicked an iron plate this time. All sorts of discussions were going on. Chumu swept his gaze over. His sharp gaze caused the distant, sacred rank experts to dodge, not daring to look him in the eye. The sharpness was too strong. The puppets flew towards Chumu after killing the enemy. Chumu waved his sleeve and collected all the puppets. Yang Zhen, collect the spoils of war. Don't let their corpses go either, Chumu said. Spoils of war usually referred to spatial rings. The collection of every saint rank expert should not be too bad. The spatial rings of over 100 saint rank experts would definitely enrich the cultivation resources of the True Sword sect by a lot. As for the corpse, Chumu planned to bring it into the profound Yang Sword realm to feed the ancient spirit beast. Humans ate spirit beasts and spirit beasts ate humans. It was very normal. The body of a saint expert had already surpassed the level of mortals and was constructed from energy. It was extraordinary, and to ancient spirit beasts, it was a tonic. If it wasn't for the fact that they were of the same race, it was very awkward for humans to eat each other. They would be despised and even killed. Perhaps there would also be people who would eat the flesh of saint experts to replenish themselves and cultivate. Yang Zhen, Yun Feng, and Yun He immediately took action. They burst out at full speed and dived down. Wherever they passed, the corpses of the saints of death would disappear, collected by them. The great elder's aura stagnated. It didn't continue to rise, but slowly fell instead. It couldn't be helped. His rage was only aimed at the saint rank experts of the warlord sect. However, Chu had repeatedly used strange moves to wipe out all the saints of the warlord sect, leaving him with no target to target. Coupled with the shock in his heart, his breakthrough was cut short. This was also good. That kind of breakthrough was like walking on a tightrope with a bottomless abyss below. The probability of crossing it was very low, not even 1 in 10,000. After all, forcefully advancing under anger was burning one's own potential. It wasn't a breakthrough after consolidating one's foundation and had a huge drawback. Only 1 in 10,000 could cross it. Moreover, after crossing it, one's potential would be damaged, and they would be stuck at the early stage of the 7-star saint realm for the rest of their lives. However, if the great elder had successfully broken through, even if he was only at the early stage of the 7-star saint realm, he would be able to contend against the 100 saints of the warlord sect. The probability of 1 in 10,000 was indeed very low, but no one could guarantee that they would encounter that 1 in 10,000. After wiping out the enemies and collecting the spoils of war, Chu and the others returned to the True Sword sect. They went straight to the main hall of the sect. We won. Sect Master is too strong. He killed nearly 100 saints in one strike, and he also has such a powerful puppet. Our True Sword sect's strength is much stronger than what we know. The disciples of the True Sword sect were discussing spiritedly. Their faces were flushed red from the excitement. Their blood was flowing faster, and their hands were trembling uncontrollably. The battle just now was too shocking for them. It was a challenge to their nerves. Those who left will definitely regret it. That's right, they will definitely regret it. However, there's no medicine for regret in this world. While the disciples were all excited, they were also very disdainful of those who left the True Sword sect in the face of danger. Now that the True Sword sect had displayed its strength, they were very excited, and their sense of belonging grew even stronger. Sect Master, I didn't expect you to be so strong, the second elder said in a daze. However, his eyes grew brighter and brighter. It's the True Sword sect's great fortune to have you as the sect master. Originally, they only thought that Chu, as a 1-star saint, would at most be able to fight or even defeat a 3-star saint. However, the reality was completely beyond their imagination. A 3-star saint was killed instantly, and even a 4-star saint was killed instantly. Everyone stared at Chu with burning eyes. It was as if they wanted to see through Chu. Chu only laughed. He didn't reveal his true strength. If the elders knew that his true strength was able to kill a 5-star saint rank, and if he used secret techniques and other methods, he would be able to kill a peak 5-star saint rank and contend against a normal 6-star saint rank. They would probably faint. That would be too shocking. Elders, after today's battle, you all understand that the sect's strength on the surface is not enough to fight against the Battle King sect. Chu said, however, this is also because our True Sword sect has just risen. Although we've developed rapidly in the past few years, we still don't have enough time. After today's battle, the Battle King sect won't let this matter rest. The next time they come, they will definitely send stronger people. However, after this loss, the Battle King sect probably won't send more people over so quickly. They will first investigate our True Sword sect's strength. Sect Master released 27 puppets and 3 puppet formations. The strongest one has the strength of a 7-star saint. However, there's only one of them. If the Battle King sect also sends out a 6-star saint and a 7-star saint, I'm afraid we won't be able to resist, the third elder said worriedly. Elders, you don't have to worry about this. The puppets I brought back can form the strongest puppet formation. It's comparable to an 8-star saint, Chu said. An 8-star saint? The elder's eyes widened in shock. There was only a 1-star difference between an 8-star saint and a 7-star saint, but there was a huge difference. An organization with an 8-star saint could be considered a quasi-first-rate organization, while an organization with a 9-star saint could be considered a first-rate organization. If an organization had a peerless expert, it would be considered a super first-rate organization. In the current world, saint kings had all gone into seclusion. The organizations they created were also super first-rate organizations. However, they were different from ordinary super first-rate organizations. They were called sacred grounds. The 3 puppets guarding the spiritual pool all have the strength of a 6-star saint. The puppet formation they form is comparable to an 8-star saint, Chumu said. He hadn't told the elders that he had set up a 6-star puppet formation to guard the spiritual pool. Now that he said it, the elders were shocked. As it turned out, there was an 8-star saint within the True Sword sect. Although it could only be counted as one, it was still very powerful. Right now, the True Sword sect situation was rather special. They could only be considered a quasi-second-rate organization. But because they had 8-star saint puppets, they could be considered a quasi-first-rate organization. Of course, compared to a true quasi-first-rate organization, the True Sword sect only had 8-star saint puppets. Everything else was very weak and couldn't be compared. However, compared to a quasi-second-rate organization, the True Sword sect was an incomparably powerful existence. When they heard Chumu's words and learned that the 3 6-star saint puppets guarding the spiritual pool could form a puppet formation comparable to an 8-star saint, they all let out a sigh of relief. They felt that the Battle King sect was very powerful, but they shouldn't have an 8-star saint. Otherwise, the Battle King sect would have the strength of a quasi-first-rate organization. Not only would they attack third-rate and quasi-second-rate organizations, they wouldn't even let second-rate organizations off. Up until now, they hadn't heard of the Battle King sect attacking a second-rate organization. This gave them the impression that the Battle King sect was only a second-rate organization. However, their origins were mysterious. Perhaps they had some powerful backing. Sect Master, with this change, I feel that the time needed to break through has shortened. The great elder said. The aura around his body fluctuated, appearing very unstable. This was the result of taking a risk to break through in anger. It was hard to say whether the great elder's situation was a blessing or a curse. It would depend on his own fortune. Great elder, go to the profound Yang Sword Hall and cultivate in seclusion. Chumu said, Yes, sect master. I will consolidate and break through as soon as possible. As long as I have the strength of a 7-star saint, I won't need to fear the Battle King sect. The great elder said, according to the current situation, as long as he had the strength of a 7-star saint, he wouldn't need to fear the Battle King sect. However, the truth was still unclear. There was still hope. Great elder, there's no need to be anxious. Breaking through to the higher stage of the saint realm is also very dangerous. Nourish your Yuan spirit first, and let your Yuan spirit break through before breaking through to the next level. It's more reliable. Chumu said. The great elder bowed and bid farewell. He quickly headed to the profound Yang Sword Hall. In the outside world, the news of the True Sword sect's strength quickly spread.